Thank you for joining in today's Cryptid Horror Stories. The first story today is called The Surface Tension, and this is a horror story about the water leaper. And in this story, in a remote, mist-heavy valley in North Wales, centered around a black lake, a deep, peat-stained body of water rumored to be bottomless, a group of 8 urban explorers and amateur anglers. They are confident, equipped with high-end gear and dismissive of local folklore. They've come to a secluded spot to film a wilderness survival vlog. The water is unnaturally still, acting like a mirror. The locals in the nearest village warn them not to fish after the sun hits the ridge, but the group ignores this as rural superstition. The second story today is called The Death Tree, and this is a horror story about the Skudakumooch. And in this story, a disgraced forensic anthropologist specializing in ancient burial rites is hired by a private estate to document a problematic family plot in the deep woods of Maine. The client, a descendant of a disgraced 18th century occultist, wants the site mapped before it is permanently sealed. The site, a depression in the earth where the trees grow in concentric unnatural circles. They notice the death tree, a massive blackened cedar that seems to absorb light. They spend the first 2 days documenting the site, noting that the soil is strangely warm to the touch, even in autumn. In the description below, the stories have been timestamped. Also, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss the stories yet to come. Now for today's cryptid horror stories, I hope you all enjoy. The surface tension. The carbon fiber rod snapped in slow motion. Not the quick, clean fracture of a brittle material under sudden load, but the lazy, sickening flex of something being bent past its tolerance. First a bow, then a crack, then the splintering separation of fibers that sounded like bones being pulled apart at the joints. The rod had been designed to handle 40 pounds of test line under extreme conditions. A piece of engineering so refined that it had been used to land marlin in the Atlantic and tuna in the Pacific, and it had cost more than the car that had carried it to this lake. It snapped because something the size of a calf had just leaped out of the water and landed squarely on the fisherman's shoulders. The image was wrong in every way that an image could be wrong. The thing that came out of the lake was not a fish. It was not a bird. It was not anything that the fisherman, a man named Eddie Kavanagh, 31 years old, former rugby player, current bartender, amateur angler, and in 10 seconds the first casualty of the longest night of his friends' lives, had ever seen or imagined or been warned about. It was wet, membranous, and it moved with a velocity that the human eye could track, but the human brain could not process, arriving from the surface of the lake to the top of his body in a single, fluid leap that skipped across the water like a flat stone thrown by a giant hand. Eddie had been standing on a protruding rock at the edge of the Black Lake, his rod extended over the water, his line disappearing into the dark, peat-stained depths. He had felt a tug, not the tentative nibble of a small fish, but a deep, heavy pull that bent the rod tip toward the water and made the reel scream. He had tightened his grip, set the hook, and begun to reel. And for a moment, just a moment, he had felt the electric joy of a man connected to something large and powerful and alive, the primal thrill of the catch that had drawn humans to water for 10,000 years. Then the line had gone slack, not snapped, slack, as if whatever had been on the other end had simply released its hold and was now coming to meet him. The thing hit the water 20 feet from the rock. It did not splash. It skipped. A single, impossible skip, its body striking the surface and bouncing off it with a sound like a wet palm slapping stone, using the tension of the water the way a stone uses it, the way a drag racer uses a launch pad. Its wings, membranous, translucent, veined with dark lines that could have been blood vessels or could have been something worse, spread wide and caught the air, and it rose, and it turned, and it was on him. Eddie's scream was the first human sound the lake had heard in 3 months. It was not a scream of pain, not yet. The pain would come when the ribs broke, when the weight of the creature on his shoulders drove him downward, and his rib cage struck the rock with a force that turned the cartilage between the bones to paste. It was a scream of confusion, of the brain trying to process something that did not fit into any category it had been built to handle. And then, as the creature's long, reptilian tail whipped around his neck, as the stinger at the tip, a curved, hollow spine the color of old bone, pierced the skin just below his left ear and entered the jugular, the scream became something else. It became a gurgle, and then it became silence. But before the silence, Eddie Kavanagh screamed 4 words that would echo off the valley walls and reach his friends on the shore 30 meters away. 4 words that were distorted by the acoustics of the valley into something that barely sounded human, but that each of them, in the private theaters of their own terror, would later swear they understood perfectly. It's not swimming, it's skipping. The lake was called Llyn Du, the Black Lake, and it sat in a valley in the mountains of North Wales like a bruise on the landscape. It was roughly a kilometer long and half a kilometer wide, an oval of water so dark that it looked solid, a sheet of obsidian glass set in a bowl of gray-green hills that rose steeply on all sides and blocked the sun for most of the day. The water was peat-stained, colored by the decomposition of organic matter in the surrounding bog, and it was said by the people who lived in the valley, the few who still did, to be bottomless. Not deep, bottomless. The distinction mattered. Deep was a measurement, bottomless was a warning. The valley had a feeling to it. Not a haunted feeling, not the creaking floorboard, rattling chain feeling of a Victorian ghost story, but something older and more fundamental, the feeling of a place that had been avoided for a very long time by everything that could avoid it. The sheep that grazed on the lower slopes did not come near the water. The birds that nested in the crags above the lake did not fly over it. The trees that grew on the shore grew away from it, their trunks angled backward, their roots gripping the soil as if they were trying to pull themselves away from the water's edge. And the lake itself was unnaturally still. Not calm, still. The surface was a mirror, unbroken by wind or current, reflecting the gray sky and the gray hills with a clarity that was too perfect, too absolute, as if the water was not reflecting the world above but replacing it with a copy that was more real than the original. The group had arrived the day before. 8 people, 4 vehicles, enough equipment to survive a week in the wilderness and enough cameras to document every minute of it. They were urban explorers, amateur anglers and content creators, a loose collective of friends and acquaintances who had been making wilderness survival videos for 3 years and had built a modest following on the back of their enthusiasm, their gear, and their willingness to go places that other people didn't. Dylan Reese was the organizer. He was 34, lean, dark-haired, with the kind of restless energy that made him good at planning and bad at sitting still. He had been fishing since he was a boy. His grandfather had taken him to lakes and rivers across Wales, teaching him the craft the way some grandfathers taught carpentry or gardening, as a transferable skill, a way of understanding the world through patience and observation. Dylan had inherited his grandfather's rods, his tackle box, and his quiet, methodical approach to the water, and he had added to them a modern obsession with gear. High-end rods, digital fish finders, waterproof drones, GoPros mounted on every available surface. He was the one who had found Llyn Du on an old ordnance survey map, the one who had read about the local legends and dismissed them as rural color, the one who had convinced the others that this was the perfect location for their next video. The Black Lake, fishing the bottomless water. The others were Eddie Kavanagh, the bartender and angler who was now silent on a rock with a stinger in his neck, Mayor Hughes, a schoolteacher and the group's resident skeptic, who had come because she liked the outdoors and because she was dating Dylan. Tomos Price, a software developer and the group's cameraman, who had invested in a red digital cinema camera that he treated like a firstborn child. Gethin Lloyd, a carpenter and the group's strongest swimmer, who had grown up near the coast and was comfortable in water that would terrify most people. Ryan Evans, a nurse and the group's medic, who carried a trauma kit everywhere and had never needed to use it for anything more serious than a sprained ankle. Owen Price, a barista and the group's social media manager, who was more interested in the footage than the fishing. And Cyan Morgan, a graduate student in marine biology, who had come because the lake's ecosystem was reportedly unique and she wanted samples. They had set up camp in a clearing on the eastern shore, 100 meters from the water's edge, on a patch of ground that was dry enough for tents and flat enough for a fire pit. The vehicles were parked on a track that ran along the ridge above the camp, the last point where the road was navigable, after which it degraded into a footpath that disappeared into the bog. The camp was well organized, well equipped, and well positioned, and Dylan had been satisfied, when the tents were up and the fire was lit and the sausages were sizzling, that this was going to be a good trip. The locals in the village, Cryptid, 3 kilometers down the valley, had been less enthusiastic. Dylan had stopped at the village shop to buy supplies and had mentioned their destination to the woman behind the counter, a weathered, elderly woman whose expression had changed when he said the name. She had looked at him for a long moment, then said in Welsh-accented English that was careful and precise, "Don't fish after the sun hits the ridge." Dylan had laughed and asked why. The woman had not laughed. "The water takes what it wants," she had said. "After the sun goes behind the ridge, the lake belongs to something else." Dylan had filed this under rural superstition, and bought his supplies and driven up the track and set up his camp and felt good about his trip. The sun had set behind the ridge at 1647, painting the sky in shades of copper and violet, and the lake had turned from a mirror to a void, its surface so dark that it seemed to absorb the last of the light rather than reflect it, as if the water was a mouth that was slowly closing over the day. That had been last night. This morning the lake was a mirror again, and the sky was gray, and the air smelled of peat and rain and something else, something metallic, something that did not belong to the valley, something that Dylan had noticed but had not mentioned because he did not want to seem like the kind of person who noticed smells and worried about them. The sound came at 11:30. It was not a sound that belonged to the valley. That was the first thing that registered, not the sound itself, but its wrongness, the way it sat in the acoustic landscape like a wrong note in a chord. The valley had its own music, the low moan of wind through the crags, the distant bleating of sheep, the layered calls of ravens and curlews, the soft, constant murmur of water moving through the bog. This sound was none of those things. It was a shriek, piercing, metallic, echoing off the valley walls with a resonance that was too long, too sustained, too powerful for any bird. It sounded like a hawk, and it sounded like a human scream. And it sounded like neither because it was both, a frequency that occupied the space between the animal and the human, as if the thing producing it had learned to make sounds by listening to both and had never quite figured out which one it was supposed to be. The sound lasted 3 seconds. Then it stopped and the valley was silent, not just quiet but silent the way a room goes silent when a predator enters it. The birds stopped calling. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Even the sheep in the field above the lake, a flock of 24 ewes and lambs that had been grazing peacefully on the lower slopes, responded. They bolted. Not scattered, not wandered away, but bolted. A sudden, panicked stampede up the hill, away from the water, their hooves thundering on the turf, their bleating high and sharp and terrified. The lambs ran first, the ewes herding them from behind, and within 10 seconds the field was empty and the sheep were 300 meters away, huddled against the stone wall at the top of the slope, pressing against it as if they were trying to push through it and keep going. "Jesus," Tomo said. He had been adjusting his camera on its tripod when the sound hit, and his hands were still on the rig, frozen in the act of tightening a bolt. "What was that?" "Raptor," Dylan said. He was standing by the fire, a mug of tea in his hand, his face turned toward the crags above the lake. "Buzzard, maybe, or a peregrine. They've got a scream that sounds almost human." "Since when do buzzards make sheep stampede?" Mare asked. She was sitting on a camp chair, a book in her lap, her eyes on the lake. She had been watching the water all morning, not because she was interested in fishing, but because the stillness of it was mesmerizing. A flat, unbroken surface that reflected the sky with such precision that it was difficult to tell which way was up. She had mentioned at breakfast that the lake made her uncomfortable. Not scared, she had said, just aware, like the water is looking at me. Raptors can spook livestock, Dylan said. It's not unusual, especially if there are lambs. The ewes get defensive. The ewes are running away from the lake, not toward it, Gethin pointed out. He was standing at the edge of the camp, his arms crossed, his eyes on the water. Gethin was the most physically imposing member of the group, broad-shouldered, thick-armed, with the kind of build that came from years of manual labor and cold water swimming. He was also the most observant, the quietest, and the one most likely to notice things that the others dismissed. They're not running from a bird. They're running from the water. From the water, Owen repeated, looking up from his phone. What would they be running from the water for? It's a lake. Gethin did not answer. He was watching the lake, and what he saw, or what he thought he saw, because it happened so fast that he would later be unsure whether it had happened at all, was a disturbance. Not a ripple, not a wave, but a skip. A single brief contact between something and the surface of the water, a point of impact that created a splash no larger than a fist, then a second point of impact 3 meters further, then a third, then nothing. The surface was still again. The mirror was unbroken. Gethin said nothing. He told himself it was a fish. A big fish jumping. Pike could grow to impressive sizes in deep, undisturbed lakes, and the behavior he had seen was consistent with a large fish breaching the surface. He told himself this, and he almost believed it, and then the feeling passed and he went back to the camp and helped Tomos carry the camera rig to the shore. The group spent the morning setting up for the video. Tomos positioned the red camera on the highest point of the shore, where it had an unobstructed view of the lake and the valley. Owen set up 2 GoPros, one on a rock at the water's edge, one on a drone that he flew in a slow, wide orbit above the camp. Sane collected water samples from 3 points along the shore, noting the pH, temperature, and turbidity with the careful precision of someone who was planning to write a paper about this. Dylan and Eddie prepared their rods. Mare read her book. Ryan organized the medical kit. Gethin stood at the water's edge and watched the surface and did not say what he had seen. The lake was still. The sky was gray. The sun was behind the ridge. Eddie went to the rock at 1300. The rock was a natural platform, a flat, moss-covered slab of slate that protruded 6 meters into the lake, rising about a foot above the water's surface. It was the perfect fishing spot. Deep water close to shore, no overhead obstruction, a stable platform for casting. Eddie had claimed it the night before, and he had been the first one on it this morning, his rod set up, his bait prepared, his posture relaxed and confident. He was a good angler, patient, observant, with the quiet focus that the sport required, and he had been looking forward to this all week. The others were scattered along the shore. Dylan was 20 meters to the left, standing on a gravel bank, his line in the water. Tomos was behind the red camera, monitoring the frame. Owen was flying the drone in lazy circles above the lake, its camera recording the dark surface from above. Cyan was at the water's edge collecting her samples. Mare, Gethin, Ryan, and Owen's social media assistant. A young man named Kai who had joined the trip at the last minute and who everyone kept forgetting was there, were in the camp, out of direct line of sight of the rock. Nobody saw the first skip. Nobody saw the thing that came out of the water and landed on Eddie's shoulders. Nobody saw the rod snap, or the tail whip around his neck, or the stinger pierce his jugular. They heard the scream, the 4 words, distorted by distance and acoustics, and then they heard nothing, because the scream had been cut short by something that moved faster than sound could carry. Dylan was the first to react. He was closest, 20 meters away, close enough to see Eddie on the rock, close enough to see the shape on his shoulders, close enough to see that the shape was not a fish, Not a bird, not anything that he could identify, but a wet, membranous mass that was pressed against Eddie's body like a lover. Its wings folded around him, its tail wrapped around his neck, its stinger buried in his throat. And Eddie was not moving. Eddie was limp, his arms hanging at his sides, his rod in the water, his head tilted at an angle that was wrong, and the dark stain that was spreading down his shoulder was not water. "Eddie," Dylan shouted. He dropped his rod and ran toward the rock, his boots sliding on the wet slate, his hands reaching for his friend. "Eddie, what?" The thing looked up. It did not have eyes, at least, not eyes that Dylan could see. It had a face, of sorts, a flat, wide, featureless expanse of pale, translucent skin that was stretched over a skull that was too wide and too flat for any animal he knew. And across that face, in the place where eyes should have been, there were two dark depressions. Not sockets, not holes, but indentations, like thumbprints pressed into wet clay, and they were pointed at Dylan. And Dylan felt something when they pointed at him. A jolt. A vibration. A frequency that bypassed his ears and went straight to the base of his skull. A sound that was felt and not heard. And for a fraction of a second, the world tilted sideways and his vision went white and his legs buckled and he fell to his knees on the gravel. The thing turned back to Eddie. Its wings opened, a slow, deliberate unfurling like an umbrella being inverted, and they were vast, easily 2 meters from tip to tip, translucent and veined, wet and glistening in the gray light. The wings beat once, twice, and the thing lifted off Eddie's body and rose into the air, and Eddie's body fell forward onto the rock, and the sound it made when it hit was wet and heavy and final. The thing did not fly away, it skipped. It hit the surface of the lake with a sound like a wet slap, a single sharp impact that sent up a fan of dark water, and then it bounced, rising, turning, its wings catching the air, and it hit the water again and bounced again, and skipped across the surface of the black lake with a velocity that was obscene, each impact creating a splash that was larger than a man's body, each skip covering 10 meters of distance. The sound, slap, 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 echoing off the valley walls like the heartbeat of something that was waking up. It skipped to the center of the lake. It stopped. And then, in a movement that was so fast that the drone camera, flying 100 feet above, captured it as a single blurred frame, it turned and skipped back toward the shore. Toward Dylan. Toward the group. Toward the people who were standing at the water's edge, their mouths open, their cameras rolling, their minds trying and failing to process what they had just seen. Dylan ran. He did not think about running. He did not decide to run. His body ran, the way a body runs when the ancient part of the brain, the part that has been calculating escape routes since the first organism developed a nervous system, takes over and the conscious mind is reduced to a passenger screaming instructions that no one is listening to. He ran for the camp, his boots slipping on the wet grass, his lungs burning, the sound of the thing skipping, slap, 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 behind him growing louder, closer, each impact a percussive announcement of its approach. He made it 20 meters before the sound stopped. He did not stop running. He ran another 10 meters, then 20, then 30, and then he was in the camp, among the tents, among the people, and he turned around, gasping, and looked back at the lake. The thing was on the shore. It was 30 meters away, standing on the gravel bank where Dylan had been standing a minute ago. Standing was not quite right. It was crouched, its body low to the ground, its wings half folded, its tail curled behind it like a question mark. In the gray light of the valley, with the dark water behind it and the dark hills above it, it looked like something that had been carved from wet clay and left to dry in a room with no light. Its skin was pale, not white but a translucent grayish color, like the skin of a salamander or a cave fish, through which the dark lines of its circulatory system were visible, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat that was visible even at this distance. Its body was roughly the size of a large dog, but its proportions were all wrong. The body too long, the legs too short, the head too wide, the tail too thick. And its wings. Its wings were enormous, folded against its body like collapsed sails, their membranes wet and veined and glistening with a substance that was not water, an oily sheen that caught the gray light and gave it an iridescent quality, like oil on a puddle. "Get back," Dylan said. His voice was a croak. "Get back from the shore, everyone, now." The others had seen. From the camp they had seen Eddie's body on the rock, limp, dark-stained, still. They had seen the thing skip across the lake. They had seen Dylan running. And now they were on their feet, their faces white, their bodies frozen in the involuntary stillness that prey animals exhibit when a predator is close and movement means death. "Eddie," Mare said. She was looking past Dylan, past the thing at the rock where Eddie's body lay. "Is he?" "He's dead," Dylan said. "Don't go to the shore. Don't go near the water. Get to the cars." The cars. The vehicles were parked on the ridge above the camp, 200 meters away, up a slope of tussock grass and loose stone. 200 meters of open ground. The thing was between them and the cars. It was on the shore, 30 meters from the camp, and the track to the ridge ran along the shore for 100 meters before it turned inland and climbed. "We can't get to the cars," Gethin said. He had moved to the edge of the camp, his eyes on the thing, his body coiled with the tension of a man who was calculating the distance between himself and a threat and not liking the answer. "It's between us and the track runs along the water. If that thing can skip across the lake, it can skip across the bog." "The shallow water," Science said. She was beside Gethin, her voice shaking but her mind working, the scientist in her cataloging the thing's movement even as the animal in her was screaming at her to run. "It uses the surface tension to move. It skips like a stone. It needs the water to be deep enough to absorb the impact without breaking the surface, but shallow enough that it can push off. The bog, the marsh around the lake, is shallow. If the water's less than a foot deep, it can't skip. It would get stuck." "Would it?" Dylan asked, "or would it just crawl?" Nobody answered because the thing moved. It moved the way a snake moves when it's been disturbed. A sudden, fluid, boneless surge of motion that covered the ground between it and the camp in a way that should not have been possible for something with legs. It did not run. It did not hop. It extended its wings, pressed them flat against the ground, and used them as paddles, its body undulating between them, its legs tucked beneath it. And it moved across the gravel bank and onto the grass with a speed that was not running speed or slithering speed, but something in between. A locomotion that had no name because nothing that moved like this had ever been documented by anyone who survived to write about it. It covered the 30 meters between the shore and the camp in 4 seconds. The group scattered. Tomos grabbed the red camera, not the tripod, just the body, and ran. Owen dropped the drone controller and ran. Kai ran. Ryan grabbed the medical kit and ran. Mare ran. Cyan ran. Gethin did not run. He stood his ground, his arms at his sides, his eyes on the thing, and as it passed him, 5 meters to his left, its body a wet, gray blur of membrane and muscle, he stepped toward it and kicked it. He kicked it the way a rugby player kicks a ball, a full, committed swing of his right leg, his boot connecting with the thing's body just behind its head. The impact was solid, meaty, the sound of leather on wet flesh, and the thing's trajectory shifted. It skidded sideways, its wings flaring, its tail whipping around. And for a moment, a fraction of a second, it was disoriented, its body spinning on the wet grass, its limbs scrambling for purchase. Gethin did not wait to see if it recovered. He ran. He was fast, faster than anyone else in the group, his legs powered by years of swimming and labor, and he was 10 meters ahead of the thing when it caught its balance and resumed its pursuit. The group was running along the shore, away from the camp, toward the point where the track turned inland and climbed to the ridge. The shore was narrow, a strip of gravel and grass between the water and the hillside, 10 meters wide at most, and the thing was behind them, skipping now, using the wet grass and the shallow puddles at the water's edge as a surface, its wings beating in a rhythm that was too fast to count, each skip covering 5 meters. The sound, slap, 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 a metronome of death that was getting closer. Kai was the slowest. He was 22, slightly built, not a runner, and he was at the back of the group, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his feet slipping on the wet grass. He was 10 meters behind the next person, Ryan, who was carrying the medical kit and whose pace was slowed by the weight, and the gap was growing. "Run!" someone shouted. It might have been Dylan. It might have been Gethin. It might have been all of them, a collective scream of terror and urgency that bounced off the valley walls and came back as a chorus. Kai ran. He ran with everything he had, his lungs burning, his legs pumping, his eyes fixed on the back of Ryan's jacket 20 meters ahead. He was not going to make it. He knew it. The slapping sound was behind him, getting louder, and he could feel something. A vibration, a change in the air pressure, the displacement of something large moving fast, and he knew with the absolute certainty of an animal that has been cornered that he was not going to make it. The thing hit him between the shoulder blades. Not a skip this time, a launch. It had come off the water at an angle, its wings spread, its body horizontal, and it struck Kai in the upper back with the full force of its mass moving at skip velocity. The impact drove Kai face first into the grass, his body folding around the point of impact, his spine bending in a direction that spines are not designed to bend. He did not scream. He made a sound, a short, exhaled "oh." And then the thing was on top of him, its wings folding around his body, its tail whipping around his legs, and it was dragging him toward the water. Ryan turned. She saw his body being pulled across the grass, his fingers clawing at the ground, his face turned toward her, his eyes wide, his mouth open, no sound coming out. And she did the bravest and most futile thing that any of them would do that day. She ran toward him. She ran back toward the thing, the medical kit swinging from her shoulder, and she pulled a canister of bear spray from the side pocket, a high-concentration capsaicin spray that she had brought as a precaution against aggressive wildlife, and she aimed it at the thing and she pressed the trigger. The spray hit the thing's face. A full, concentrated burst of capsaicin, 10% military grade, aimed directly at the pale, featureless expanse of skin that passed for a face. The thing flinched. Its grip on Kai loosened for a second, less than a second, and Kai pulled himself free, scrambling on his hands and knees, his legs not working properly, his body moving on adrenaline and nothing else. But the thing recovered. The bear spray had irritated it. Its face was reddening, its depressions, the eyeless indentations, were contracting, its mouth opening wide, wider than any mouth should open, revealing a throat that was lined not with teeth but with ridges, cartilaginous, dark, spiraling inward like the bore of a gun, and from that throat came the shriek. The same sound they had heard earlier, but louder, closer, aimed directly at Ryan from a distance of 2 meters. The sound hit her like a physical blow. She staggered, her hands going to her ears, the bear spray canister falling to the ground. Her vision blurred. Her sense of balance evaporated. The world tilted, spun, and she was on her knees, then on her side, the gray sky and the gray hills and the dark water all merging into a nauseating smear. The shriek was not just loud. It was destabilizing. It operated on a frequency that interfered with the vestibular system, the inner ear's balance mechanism, turning the world into a spinning, directionless void where up was down and forward was backward, and the only constant was the pain behind her eyes. The thing grabbed her. Its hands, its terrible, webbed, clawed hands, closed around her ankles, and it pulled, and Ryan slid across the grass toward the water, her fingers scraping at the ground, her body limp with vertigo, unable to resist, unable to coordinate her muscles, unable to do anything but feel the cold water close over her legs, her hips, her waist, her chest. And then the dark surface of the lake closed over her face, and she was gone. The water did not splash. It swallowed. The surface tension of the lake absorbed Ryan's body the way a mouth absorbs a piece of food, smoothly, completely, without fuss. And then the surface was still again, a flat, black mirror, unbroken, as if nothing had happened. Kai was still crawling. He had made it 5 meters from the point where the thing had released him, his legs dragging behind him, his back bent at an angle that would require surgery if he survived long enough to reach a hospital. The thing emerged from the water behind him, not skipping this time but rising, its body pushing through the surface like a diver surfacing, water streaming from its membranes, its wings unfolding, and it was holding something. It was holding Ryan's medical kit. It had taken the kit from Ryan's body, and it was carrying it the way a cat carries a kitten, loosely, casually in its mouth, and it set the kit on the grass and stepped over it and moved toward Kai with the unhurried, deliberate pace of something that was not hunting but collecting. Dylan saw this from 100 meters away. He was at the bend in the track, where the path turned inland and began to climb, and he was looking back, and he could see Kai on the grass, and he could see the thing moving toward him, and he could see the water where Ryan had gone, and he could see Eddie's body on the rock, and he could see the camp with its tents and its fire pit and its cameras and its coolers and its normal human, everyday things that were now props in a nightmare. "We have to go back," Gethin said. He was beside Dylan, breathing hard, his face set in the hard expression of a man who was angry and terrified in equal measure. "Kai is still." "You can't go back," Dylan said. "That thing will skip across the water and be on you before you make it 10 meters. Then we distract it, we throw something, we..." "Look at it, Gethin, look at how it moves. It's not a fox chasing a rabbit, it's hurting us. It took Eddie first, the one on the rock, the one furthest out. Then it came for the group. It's picking us off from the edges. It knows where we are, it knows where we're going. It's between us and the cars, and the only way past it is along the shore, and the shore is its territory." Gethin looked at the thing. It had reached Kai. It was standing over him, not attacking, not feeding, just standing, its body motionless, its tail swaying slowly, its wings half open as if it was waiting for something. Waiting for them to come back. Waiting for them to try. "6 of us left," Gethin said. 6 out of 8. 5, Dylan said. He was looking at the water, at the spot where Ryan had gone under, at the still, dark, bottomless surface that had swallowed her without a ripple. They climbed. The track turned inland and rose steeply, leaving the shore behind, and they climbed it in a stumbling, gasping, terrified group. Dylan, Gethin, Mare, Tomos, Cyan, and Owen. 6 people moving as fast as their legs could carry them, their eyes on the path and their ears on the sound behind them. The slapping sound had stopped. The thing had not followed them up the track. It was still on the shore, still standing over Kai's body, still waiting. They reached the ridge. The vehicles were there, 2 Land Rovers and a van, parked on the gravel track, their doors unlocked, their keys in the ignitions where the group had left them. The ridge was 200 meters above the lake, and from this height the water was a dark oval set in the green and gray of the valley, small and still and beautiful in the way that things that want to kill you are beautiful, from a distance, with a barrier between you and them. Dylan reached the first Land Rover and pulled the door open and froze. The keys were in the ignition. He turned them. The engine turned over, coughed, and died. He tried again. The engine coughed again, weaker, and died. A third time. Nothing. The battery was dead, not discharged, not weak, but dead, as if something had drained it overnight, as if the valley had siphoned the energy from the batteries the way the lake swallowed bodies. He tried the second Land Rover. The same. The engine did not turn over. The battery was dead. The van. The same. 3 vehicles, 3 dead batteries, on a ridge 200 meters above a lake that was looking at them with the flat, patient gaze of something that had been patient for a very long time and was in no hurry to stop. "The batteries," Tomo said. He was standing behind Dylan, the red camera in his hands, its recording lights still on, still capturing everything, because Tomos was the kind of person who documented, who recorded, who preserved, even when what he was preserving was the worst day of his life. All 3, at the same time. "It's not a coincidence," Cyan said. She was standing at the edge of the ridge looking down at the lake. From this height she could see the water clearly, the dark, peat-stained surface, the ring of reeds and marsh around the edge, the flat, featureless expanse that had no current, no wind, no movement of any kind. And she could see the thing. It was on the shore near the camp, and it was not alone. There were two. The second one was smaller, not by much, but enough to be distinguishable, and it had emerged from the lake at some point during the climb, rising from the dark water with the same fluid, boneless motion, its wings spreading, its body glistening. It was standing beside the first one, and they were both looking up at the ridge. They were looking at the vehicles. They were looking at the people. "There's more than one," Cyan said. Her voice was flat, the voice of a scientist reporting data. "The thing that killed Eddie was the first. There's at least one more. They're not solitary, they're colonial." "Colonial," Dylan repeated, "like bees." "Like bees," Cyan confirmed. "Social structure, division of labor. One hunts, one guards, the lake is the hive, and we walked into it." "Can they get up here?" Mare asked. She was standing by the van, her arms wrapped around herself, her face white. "The ridge, is it high enough?" The ridge was 200 meters above the lake. Things moved by skipping. They needed water or a water-like surface to launch from. The ridge was dry, grass-covered, and separated from the lake by a slope of loose stone and tussock grass that was too steep and too rough for skipping, unless they could fly. "They can glide," Cyan said. "The wings are large enough for gliding flight from a height, but they're not built for sustained flight. They're too heavy, the wings are too rigid. They need the water to launch. If they try to come up the slope, they'd have to walk, and they're not built for walking. They're built for skipping." "So we're safe up here?" Owen asked. He was sitting on the ground by the van, his phone in his hand, trying to get a signal. No signal. The valley was a dead zone, no cell coverage, no Wi-Fi, no communication with the outside world. They were alone. "We're safe as long as we stay away from the water," Cyan said. "But we can't get down without going past the lake. The track is the only way out, and the track runs along the shore for 100 meters before it reaches the ridge. They're between us and the road." The road. The main road, 3 kilometers down the valley, past the village, past the shop, past the woman who had said, "Don't fish after the sun hits the ridge." The road that would take them to civilization, to hospitals, to police, to people with guns and phones, and the ability to make the world aware that something in this valley was killing people. 3 kilometers of valley, 200 meters of ridge, 100 meters of shore, and 2 things in the water that could skip across the surface at the speed of a galloping horse. "We wait," Dylan said. "We wait until dark. Maybe they're less active at night. Maybe we can slip past them in the dark." "Or maybe they're more active at night," Gethin said. "They're cave-lake animals. They're probably nocturnal." "Then we wait until morning. We wait until they're asleep, or whatever they do, and we go." "And Kai," Mare asked, "and Ryan and Eddie, do we just leave them?" Dylan looked at the lake, at the thing standing on the shore, its body a gray smudge against the green, at the spot where Ryan had gone under, at Eddie's body on the rock, small and still and dark, at Kai, who might still be alive, who might still be breathing, who might still be lying on the grass with his broken back, waiting for someone to come and help him. "Kai might be alive," he said. "If we go down there, both of us, armed, fast, we might be able to grab him and get back up before they can reach us." "Armed with what?" Gethin asked. "We've got fishing knives and a camp axe. That thing took a full kick from me and didn't even slow down." "Then we distract them. We throw something into the lake on the other side. They go to investigate, we grab Kai, we come back up." "It's a plan," Gethin said. "It's a bad plan, but it's a plan." The plan failed in the first 30 seconds. Dylan and Gethin descended the slope, sliding, stumbling, keeping low, keeping quiet, while Tomos watched from the ridge with binoculars and Mare prepared a distraction, a cooler full of food, which she would throw down the hillside toward the opposite shore, hoping the sound would draw the things away from Kai's position. They reached the bottom of the slope. The shore was ahead, a narrow strip of gravel and grass between the slope and the lake. Kai was 20 meters to the left, lying on the grass near the water's edge, his body motionless, his face turned toward the sky. The things were 100 meters to the right, standing near the camp, their bodies still, their wings folded, their tails swaying in unison like metronomes. Dylan signaled to Gethin. They moved toward Kai, staying close to the slope, using the cover of the tussock grass and the loose stone. 20 meters. 15. 10. 5. Dylan reached Kai first, dropping to his knees beside the young man, his hand going to Kai's neck to check for a pulse. Kai was alive. His pulse was thready, weak, but present. His back was broken. He could feel the wrongness in the spine, the way the vertebrae sat at an angle that was not survivable without intervention. But he was breathing, shallow and irregular, his chest rising and falling in small, trembling movements that were barely visible. "Got him," Dylan whispered. "He's alive, grab his legs." Gethin moved to Kai's feet. He positioned himself, ready to lift, ready to carry, ready to run. Dylan took Kai's shoulders. On the ridge, Mare raised the cooler above her head, ready to throw. And then the slapping sound started. It came from the lake, not from the far shore, not from the camp, from directly behind them, from the water that was 3 meters to their right, the dark, still, bottomless water that they had been so careful to avoid, the water that they had thought was empty because the things were 100 meters away on the other side of the lake. They were wrong. There were not 2. There were not 3. There were many more, and they had been in the water the whole time, beneath the surface, motionless, invisible, waiting for the prey to come to the water's edge. The first one broke the surface a meter from the shore. Dylan saw it in the corner of his eye, a gray, wet, membranous shape erupting from the dark water with a sound that was not a splash but a slap, the flat, percussive impact of a body hitting a surface at speed, and it was airborne, its wings spreading, its tail whipping, and it was not coming for Dylan or Gethin. It was coming for Kai, for the body that was already broken, already helpless, already an offering. Dylan pulled. He pulled with everything he had, dragging Kai's upper body across the grass, his heels digging into the ground, his arms screaming with the effort. Gethin lifted the legs. They moved slowly, terribly slowly, the weight of a grown man on broken legs that dragged and caught on every tussock and stone. And behind them the thing landed on the shore, its wings folding, its body settling, its tail swinging around like a pendulum, and it was 3 meters away, and it was not moving, and it was watching. "Go," Dylan said. "Go, go, go." They went. They carried Kai between them, his body hanging like a broken marionette, his head lolling, his breath hitching with every jolt and bump, and behind them the thing followed. It did not skip. It did not run. It walked, a slow, ungainly, waddling gait that was absurd and terrifying, its wings trailing on the ground behind it, its tail raised, its stinger bobbing with each step like a scorpion's. It was not in a hurry. It knew they could not outrun it. They were carrying a broken man up a slope, and the slope was steep, and their legs were burning, and the thing was walking, just walking, at a pace that matched theirs. 3 meters behind, 4 meters, 3 meters, the stinger swaying, the tail curling, the mouth opening and closing with a rhythmic, wet clicking that was the most patient sound Dylan had ever heard. They reached the ridge. They dropped Kai on the grass, gently as they could, which was not gently at all, and turned around. The thing was at the bottom of the slope. It had not climbed. It stood at the base, its body aimed upward, its wings twitching, its tail swaying, and it was making a sound. Not the shriek, not the clicking, but a low, sustained hum that Dylan felt in his teeth. A vibration that was not sound but was felt. A frequency that was below hearing and above feeling, a bass note that seemed to come from the ground itself. And from the lake, 3 more shapes surfaced. 3 more gray, wet, membranous bodies, rising from the dark water like bubbles, their wings spreading, their bodies glistening, and they were not looking at the shore. They were looking at the ridge. They were looking at the 6 people standing on the grass above the valley, and their mouths were open. And the sound that came from them was not a shriek, but a chorus. A sustained, harmonized, impossible chorus of frequencies that was beautiful and terrible, and made Dylan's eyes water and his vision blur, and his sense of up and down dissolve into a vertigo that was so complete he fell to his knees and could not stand. 5 things. 5 gray, wet-winged things standing at the edge of a black lake in a valley in North Wales, singing a song that no human ear had heard in 100 years, and no human ear was meant to hear again. And on the ridge, 6 people, unable to stand, unable to run, unable to do anything but listen and wait for the song to end and the hunting to begin. The song ended. The silence that followed was not silence. It was the absence of the song which was worse, because the song had been a weapon, and the silence was a declaration. The declaration that the weapon had done its work and the work was about to begin. The thing that came up the slope was not skipping. It was crawling. Dylan, still on his knees, his vision swimming with the aftereffects of the sonic attack, watched it come and could not move. The creature's body was pressed flat against the hillside, its wings spread wide and gripping the loose stone and tussock grass like a spider climbing a wall. Its membranous surfaces adhered to the rock with a wet, organic sound, a sticky, sucking noise that was biological, as if the wings themselves were coated in some adhesive secretion. Its legs, tucked beneath its body, did not move. Its tail, long and thick and ending in that curved, bone-colored stinger, trailed behind it, leaving a smear of dark, oily fluid on the stone. And its mouth, that wide, lipless, spiraling mouth, was open, the cartilaginous ridges inside visible, glistening, contracting and expanding with the slow, patient rhythm of something that was breathing but did not need to breathe. It climbed, slowly, steadily, with the inexorable patience of something that had all the time in the world and knew it. Its body moved up the slope the way a slug moves across a leaf. No joints, no articulation, just the continuous, gliding propulsion of a body that was designed for water but could, when necessary, adapt to land. And behind it, at the base of the slope, the other 4 things waited, their bodies motionless, their wings folded, their mouths closed, as if they were an audience and the climbing one was a performer and the performance was murder. "Get up," Gethin said. He was on his feet, swaying, his balance still compromised by the sonic attack, but his legs were under him and his eyes were clear. He grabbed Dylan by the arm and hauled him upright. "Get up. We need to move." "Where?" Dylan asked. The ridge was narrow, a strip of flat ground between the slope they had climbed and the track that led down the other side of the valley. The vehicles were dead. The track led past the lake. The things were below them and climbing. There was nowhere to go. "The creek," Cyan said. She was on her feet, too, and she was pointing, not at the track, not at the lake, but at something on the eastern side of the ridge, a narrow, rocky channel that cut through the hillside and descended through a series of small waterfalls and pools toward the valley floor. The creek was fed by a spring higher up the mountain, and its water was clear and shallow, no more than a few inches deep in most places, running over a bed of jagged stone that was too narrow and too rough for any creature that needed space to skip. "The creek is too shallow for them to skip," Cyan said, "and the walls are too narrow for their wings. If we follow the creek down, we can get past the lake and reach the main road without going near the water." "What about Kai?" Mare asked. She was kneeling beside the young man, her hands on his face, her eyes desperate. Kai was still breathing, but each breath was shallower than the last, his body shutting down system by system, the broken spine cutting the signals between his brain and his organs like a scissors cutting wires. "We carry him," Gethin said. "I'll take his weight, someone else takes his legs." "Kai won't survive being carried down a creek bed," Ryan would have said if Ryan were alive. But Ryan was in the lake, and the only medic left was Mare, who was a school teacher, not a nurse, and who knew enough about first aid to know that moving a man with a broken spine was likely to kill him, and also knew that not moving him would definitely kill him, because the thing was climbing the slope and was 20 meters away and closing. "Tomo's own take his legs," Dylan ordered. Gethin, take his shoulders. Mare, stay with him, keep his head stable. Cyan, lead the way, move, now. They moved. They moved down the ridge toward the creek, carrying Kai between them, his body a dead weight that made every step a negotiation with gravity and panic. The creek was 50 meters away, 50 meters of flat ground, then the edge of the ridge, then the rocky channel descending through the hillside. They covered the 50 meters in 30 seconds, and behind them the climbing thing crested the ridge. It stood at the top of the slope, its body silhouetted against the gray sky, its wings spread wide, its tail raised, its stinger pointed at the group like a compass needle finding north. It did not pursue. It stood there, watching as they reached the creek and began to descend. And then it shrieked. The sound was different this time. It was not the destabilizing frequency that had brought them to their knees before. It was a call, a signal, a communication, and from the lake 4 voices answered. 4 shrieks, overlapping, harmonizing, a chorus of predation that echoed through the valley and set the sheep on the distant hillside to panicking again, their bleating a thin, distant counterpoint to the monstrous sound below. The things were coming, all of them. Up the slope, across the grass, toward the ridge, toward the creek, toward the people who were stumbling down a rocky channel with a dying man between them and no weapons and no plan and no hope, except the desperate animal hope that the geography would save them where strength and speed and technology had not. The creek was narrow, 2 meters wide at most, and its walls were steep, cut into the hillside by centuries of erosion, the stone jagged and loose and treacherous underfoot. The water was ice-cold, ankle-deep, running fast over a bed of slate and quartzite that caught every foot and turned every step into a calculation. They descended in a stumbling, sliding, desperate line. Cyan first, then Dylan, then Gethin carrying Kai's upper body, then Tomos and Owen with the legs, then Mare, her hand on Kai's face, her body bent over his, shielding him from the rocks and the water and the sound. The thing, the first one, the one that had climbed the slope, appeared at the top of the creek. It stood at the edge, its body aimed downward, and for a moment it did not move. It was evaluating. Dylan could see it, the slight tilt of the head, the subtle adjustment of the wings, the assessment of a predator that was calculating whether the space in front of it was large enough for its body and its wings. The creek was 2 meters wide. The thing's wingspan was at least 3 meters. It could not skip in the creek. It could not glide. The walls were too high, the space too tight. It could, however, crawl. It crawled. It lowered itself over the edge of the creek with the same slow, adhesive grip, its wings pressed flat against the stone walls, its body sliding downward, its tail dragging behind it. And behind it, at the top of the creek, 2 more appeared. They did not crawl. They could not. The first one was blocking the channel. They stood at the edge and watched, their mouths open, their bodies vibrating with a sound that was too low to hear but too present to ignore, a subsonic hum that Dylan felt in his gut, in his spine, in the roots of his teeth. "Keep going," Cyan said from the front. Her voice was steady, the voice of someone who had found a lifeline and was holding onto it with both hands. The creek widens further down. There's a junction. A bigger stream joins from the north, if we can reach it. The thing caught up. It came around a bend in the creek, its body filling the channel, its wings scraping against the stone walls with a sound that was somewhere between a scrape and a wet sucking noise. And it was 10 meters behind them, and it was moving faster than they were, because they were carrying a man and it was not, and the slope was steep, and the footing was bad and Kai was dying between them. "Put me down," Kai said. It was the first thing he had said since the attack, and his voice was a whisper, barely audible over the sound of the water. His eyes were open, focused, aware, and in them was a clarity that was terrible to see because it was the clarity of a man who knew he was dying and had accepted it and was making a decision. "Don't be stupid," Gethin said. "We're not leaving you." "You can't carry me and run," Kai said. His voice was stronger now, as if the clarity was giving him energy that his body could not provide. "Put me down. I'll I'll buy you time. I'll block the creek. They can't get past me in this space." "You'll die," Mare said. "I'm already dying," Kai said, and he smiled. It was a small smile, a tired smile, the smile of a man who had been afraid and was not afraid anymore, and it was the saddest thing any of them had ever seen. "Just go, please, and when you get out, tell my mum I was brave." They put him down. They put him down in the creek in the cold water with his back against the stone wall and his legs in the current, and his face turned toward the thing that was coming, and they left him. They left him because he was right, and they knew he was right, and the knowledge that he was right was the worst thing any of them had ever felt. They ran. They ran down the creek, stumbling, falling, the water soaking their clothes and the stone cutting their hands and the sound behind them, the slapping, the crawling, the wet, organic grip of something moving through a space too small for its wings, fading slowly as they put distance between themselves and the man they had left behind. The last sound Dylan heard from behind him was not a scream. It was a voice, Kai's voice, clear and calm, saying, "Come on then, you ugly bastard, come on." And then the shriek, and then silence. The creek widened. The walls lowered. The water deepened from ankle deep to calf deep, from calf deep to knee deep, and the current slowed and the stone beneath their feet became gravel, and the channel opened into a wider stream that joined from the north, exactly as Cyan had described. The junction was a small clearing, a circle of flat ground surrounded by low banks and scrubby trees, and in the center, the two streams merged and continued eastward toward the valley floor. They stopped. 5 people: Dylan, Gethin, Mare, Tomos, Cyan, and Owen. 6, not 5, because Owen was there too, silent, pale, his phone still in his hand, still searching for a signal that did not exist. 6 people, standing in a creek in a valley in North Wales, breathing hard, bleeding from cuts and scrapes, soaking wet, cold, and alive. "How far to the road?" Dylan asked. Cyan pointed downstream. "The creek joins the Maine River about a kilometer downstream. The road crosses the river on a bridge. If we follow the creek, we should reach it in 20 minutes. "Will they follow?" Mare asked. She was looking back up the creek, her face drawn, her eyes wet. "The junction is wider," Cyan said. "The water is deeper if they can skip here. I don't know. I don't know how deep the water needs to be. I don't know anything about them. Nobody does. They're not supposed to exist." They moved. Downstream, following the current, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. The creek was wider here, the banks lower, the water deeper, thigh-deep in places, the current strong enough to push them sideways. The gravel underfoot was slippery, and twice Dylan went under, the cold water closing over his head, the current pulling at his legs, and twice Gethin grabbed him by the collar and hauled him upright. They had been moving for 10 minutes when the sound started again. Slap, slap, slap. It was behind them, upstream, coming from the direction of the junction, where the creek widened and the water deepened, and the walls lowered, and the space was just big enough for something with a 3-meter wingspan to spread its wings and use the surface of the water to skip. "It's skipping," Cyan said. Her voice was flat, defeated. "The water is deep enough, it's coming." "How fast?" Dylan asked. "Fast, faster than we can run in thigh-deep water. Then we get out of the water, we go overland. The banks are bog, the marsh. It's the same terrain as the lake shore. If it can skip on the water, it can skip on the bog." "Then what do we do?" Cyan looked at the creek, at the banks, at the trees, at the sky. She was thinking, processing, running calculations in her head that were not academic but existential. And then she looked at something else, something on the northern bank, a break in the scrubby trees, a gap in the vegetation that revealed a narrow, rocky channel cutting through the hillside at a right angle to the creek. "That," she said, pointing, "that's a tributary, a smaller stream. It comes down from the ridge. It's narrow, it'll be too narrow for them. If we get out of the creek here and go up that channel, we can reach higher ground, the ridge above the valley. From there we can see the road. We can plot a route that avoids the water entirely." The slapping sound was louder, closer, each impact sending a spray of water upstream that was visible as a white fan against the dark water, the thing moving with a velocity that was obscene, each skip covering 15 meters, the rhythm accelerating as it approached. They scrambled up the bank. The ground was bog-soft, wet, their boots sinking to the ankle in black, peaty mud that sucked at their feet and released them with a sound like a plunger. The tributary was 10 meters away, a narrow, rocky cut in the hillside, its water shallow and fast, its walls steep and jagged. They climbed into it, the stone cutting their hands, the water soaking their clothes, and they climbed. The thing appeared behind them. It had reached the section of the creek where the water was deepest, and it was skipping with a terrifying, fluid efficiency. Each impact precise, each bounce controlled, its wings spreading and folding in a rhythm that was mechanical and biological at the same time. A locomotion that was not flight and not swimming, but something else entirely. Something that used the surface tension of the water the way a stone uses it, the way a bug uses it, the way nothing that weighed as much as a calf should be able to use it. It saw them in the tributary. It stopped skipping. It floated, actually floated, its body resting on the surface of the creek, its wings spread, its tail trailing in the water, and it was looking at them with those eyeless depressions, and its mouth was open. And the sound it made was not a shriek but a low, sustained moan that was worse than the shriek, because the shriek was a weapon, and the moan was a statement. It was the statement of something that was not angry, not frustrated, not even hungry, but simply patient, the statement of a predator that knew its prey would have to come down eventually, because the world was full of water and the things lived in the water and there was nowhere to go that the water could not reach. They climbed. The tributary was steep and narrow, and they climbed it with their hands and their feet, the stone wet and sharp, the water cold and fast, their bodies pushed to the limit of what they could endure. The thing did not follow. It floated in the creek below, watching, moaning, waiting. They reached the ridge, the high ground, the point where the tributary began, a spring emerging from a crack in the rock, the water clear and cold and innocent. From this point they could see the valley, the lake, the camp, the shore, the road, the village, the bridge, and they could see the things. There were not 5, there were 8. 8 gray, wet, membranous bodies scattered across the lake and the shore and the creek, their positions forming a pattern that Cyan recognized with a chill that went to her bones. They were not random. They were spaced deliberately at intervals that covered every access point to the valley, the shore, the creek, the bog, the track. They were a net, a living net cast across the valley, designed to catch anything that moved. "They're hurting us," Cyan said. "They've been hurting us since the beginning. The first one took Eddie, the one furthest out, then the shore, then the ridge, then the creek. Every time we move, they adjust. They cut off the exits. They push us toward. What are they pushing us toward?" Nobody answered. The answer was obvious and no one wanted to say it. They were being pushed toward the lake. The lake was the hive. The lake was where the things lived and bred and hunted, and everything else. The shore, the creek, the bog, the ridge, was just the perimeter, the boundary, the web that surrounded the center. And the center was hungry. "We don't go down," Dylan said. "We stay up. We follow the ridge south, away from the lake, until we find a route down to the road that doesn't cross any water." "The ridge runs out," Gethin said. He was looking south along the spine of the hill, and what he saw was a narrowing strip of high ground that descended gradually toward the valley floor, meeting the road about a kilometer south of the lake. Between the ridge and the road, the ground was dry, a field of tussock grass and loose stone, no water, no bog, no creek. But the descent was steep, and the field was exposed, and the things could skip across the bog at the base of the field if they wanted to. "It's the only way," Dylan said. "We go now, we move fast, we stay together, and we don't stop." They moved. Along the ridge southward, the ground dropping away on both sides, the lake to the west, the valley to the east, the wind cold and wet on their faces. The things in the lake were moving, too. They could see them, gray shapes on the dark water, skipping in lazy, looping arcs that traced the shoreline. their bodies visible for a moment each time they broke the surface, then gone, then visible again, like a shoal of fish circling a reef. The ridge narrowed. The ground became steeper, the grass shorter, the stone more exposed. They were descending now, moving down the southern face of the hill toward the field that lay between them and the road. The field was 200 meters of open ground, flat, dry, grass-covered with no water and no cover. Beyond the field was the road, a gravel track that wound along the valley floor, crossing the river on a stone bridge, leading south to the village and the world. 200 meters, they could see the road, they could see the bridge, they could see the tarmac beyond the gravel, gray and ordinary and beautiful, they could see safety. They entered the field. The ground was firm underfoot, dry tussock grass on a bed of gravel and clay, no water, no mud, no bog. They moved fast, their legs carrying them across the open ground at a run, their eyes on the road, their bodies leaning forward into the wind, their lungs working, their hearts pounding. The sound came from behind them, from the lake, from the shore, from the bog that fringed the southern end of the field. Slap, slap, slap. Not one sound, several, overlapping, a syncopated rhythm of impacts that was coming from multiple directions, the thing skipping across the bog with a speed that was closing the gap between the lake and the field. "They're coming across the bog," Owen shouted. He was the first to say it, the first to vocalize what they all knew, and his voice was high and thin and terrified. "They're skipping across the bog." "Keep running," Dylan shouted. "Don't stop, don't look back, just run." They ran. The field was 100 meters across now. They were halfway. The road was visible, the gravel surface, the stone bridge, the tarmac. The road was safety. The road was the world. The road was the thing that would take them away from this valley and this lake and these things that should not exist and did exist and were coming. The first one came out of the bog to the left. It skipped across the wet ground with the same fluid, impossible velocity, its wings spreading and folding, its body bouncing off the surface of the marsh with a sound that was wet and heavy and regular. Slap, slap, slap. And it was angling toward them, toward the group, toward the space between them and the road. The second one came from the right. Same trajectory, same speed, same terrible, skipping locomotion. It was flanking them, hurting them, cutting off the angles, reducing the options, pushing them toward a point where the only direction left was backward, toward the lake. Mare went down. She was not hit, she tripped, her foot catching in a tussock, her body pitching forward, her hands out, her face hitting the grass. She was down for 2 seconds. 3. Dylan grabbed her arm and pulled her up and they kept running, but the 2 seconds had cost them, and the things were closer, and the slapping sound was louder, and the road was still 100 meters away. The third one landed on the field. It did not skip to get there. It flew. It had climbed to a height, launched from the bog, skipped across the surface of the marsh until it had enough speed, then spread its wings and rose, and now it was above them, its body a gray, wet silhouette against the gray sky. Its wings spread, its tail hanging, its stinger pointed downward like a rudder. And it was descending, gliding, angling toward the group with the silent, terrible precision of a missile. It hit Tomos. The impact was catastrophic. The thing's body struck Tomos from above, its full weight driving him into the ground, his legs folding beneath him, his ribs cracking with a sound that was audible across the field. The red camera flew from his hands, hitting the ground and bouncing, its lens cracking, its recording lights still on, still capturing, still documenting. The thing's tail whipped around Tomos's chest, the stinger finding the gap between his ribs, and Tomos screamed. A short, sharp, tearing scream that was cut off by the thing's wings folding around his body, pressing him into the grass, pinning him, and the stinger was working, injecting something, and Tomos's body was going rigid. His muscles locking, his eyes open and staring and aware, and he was screaming without sound because his throat was paralyzed and his lungs were locked and the venom was doing what venom does. It was keeping him alive, keeping his heart beating, keeping his brain functioning so that he could feel everything that happened next. The thing began to feed. Its mouth opened, the spiraling ridges widening, and it pressed its face against Tomos's abdomen, and the ridges began to move, not biting, not chewing, but rasping, grinding, the cartilaginous spirals working against his skin like a file, abrading, removing, layer by layer, and the sound was wet and grinding and slow. And Tomos was watching it happen, his eyes open, his body locked, unable to move, unable to scream, able only to feel. "Tomos!" Owen screamed. He ran toward his friend, toward the thing, toward the horror, and Dylan grabbed him by the back of his jacket and pulled him back, and Owen fought him, clawing at Dylan's hands, trying to get to Tomos, trying to do something, anything, and Dylan held him and said, "He's gone. He's gone. You can't help him. We have to go. We have to go now." They ran. 4 people: Dylan, Gethin, Mare, Cyan, Owen. 5 actually, because Owen was there, was running, was sobbing, was being dragged by Dylan's grip on his jacket. 5 people, running across a field toward a road, the slapping sound behind them and around them, the things closing in, the sky gray and the air cold and the road 60 meters away. Gethin stopped. He stopped running and he turned around and he faced the things. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, his hands empty. He had dropped everything. The camp axe was back at the camp. The fishing knife was in his pocket, but his hands were occupied with fists, and he stood there in the middle of the field between the running group and the approaching things, and he was waiting. "Gethin, what are you doing?" Mare screamed. "Come on." "Keep going," Gethin said. He did not turn around. "I'll hold them. Get to the road. Get help." "You can't fight them. You saw what." "I know what they can do," Gethin said. "I know, but I can slow them down, I can be in the way, and every second they spend on me is a second you spend running." He paused. "I'm the biggest, I'm the slowest. They'll come for me first. You know they will." Mare was crying. She was standing 5 meters from him, her hands reaching toward him, her face a mask of grief and terror, and she wanted to go back and she wanted to run, and she was torn in half by the 2 impulses. "I love you," Gethin said. It was the first time he had said it. The first time anyone had heard him say it. And it was the last, because the first thing skipped across the bog and hit the field, its body a gray blur of membrane and muscle, and it was coming toward him, and Gethin turned to face it, and he set his feet, and he raised his fists, and he waited. The thing hit him at skip velocity. It did not slow down, it did not hesitate. It struck Gethin in the chest with the full force of its mass, and Gethin went backward, his feet leaving the ground, his body airborne for a moment. A long, terrible moment in which he was suspended between the gray sky and the gray field, his arms spread, his face turned upward, and there was an expression on his face that was not fear but something else, something that was almost peace, the peace of a man who had made his choice and was at peace with the consequences. He hit the ground. The thing was on him, and behind it 2 more came, skipping across the field, their bodies converging on the point where Gethin lay, and the sounds that followed were sounds that Dylan would hear every night for the rest of his life, sounds that he would try to describe to therapists and police officers and journalists, and would fail, because there are no words for the sound of a strong, brave, good man being taken apart by something that the world does not know exists. 4 people reached the road. Dylan, Mare, Cyan, and Owen, 4 out of 8. They crossed the gravel track, their feet hitting the tarmac with a sound that was so ordinary, so mundane, so blessedly normal that Dylan nearly collapsed with the relief of it. The road was hard and flat and dry and led away from the valley, away from the lake, away from the things, and they ran along it with everything they had left, their legs burning, their lungs screaming, the valley falling behind them. They ran for 20 minutes. The road descended through the valley, past the village, Cryptid, with its stone houses and its empty streets and its one shop with its one woman who had said, "Don't fish after the sun hits the ridge," and out onto the main road, the A road that ran along the coast, that connected the villages to the towns, that connected this forgotten valley to the world. A car passed, a farmer in a pickup truck taking feed to his sheep. Dylan stood in the middle of the road and waved his arms and screamed, and the truck stopped, and the farmer rolled down his window, and Dylan looked at him, covered in mud, soaked with creek water, bleeding from a dozen cuts, his face white, his eyes wild, and said, "We need help. We need the police. We need an ambulance. Something is in the lake. Something killed our friends." The farmer looked at him, looked at the others, looked at the valley behind them, the narrow road, the gray hills, the dark smudge of the lake visible in the distance, and his face changed, not with surprise, not with shock, but with something that was older and sadder and more resigned. It was the face of a man who had heard the stories all his life and had never believed them, and was now looking at the proof and wishing he had been right to disbelieve. "Get in," the farmer said. They got in. The truck cab was warm and dry and smelled of diesel and sheep feed and the ordinary, mundane, beautiful scent of the world. Science sat in the footwell, her head on her knees, shaking. Mare sat in the middle, her face blank, her eyes seeing nothing. Owen sat by the window, his phone still in his hand, and for the first time a signal appeared, one bar trembling but a signal. He dialed 999, emergency, police, ambulance. He spoke, his voice cracking, his words tumbling out in a stream of terror and exhaustion and the desperate, animal need to tell someone, anyone, that the world was not what they thought it was. The truck drove, the road unwound, the valley fell behind. Dylan looked out the rear window of the cab. The valley was receding, the hills lowering, the lake shrinking, the dark, still water becoming a smudge, a line, a memory. And on the surface of that water, visible only because he was looking, because he could not stop looking, because the part of his brain that had been calculating threats since the first organism developed a nervous system would not let him stop looking. He saw the ripples. Not one, not two, three. 3 distinct sets of ripples moving across the surface of the lake toward the southern shore, toward the point where the valley narrowed and the road ran along the water, toward the point where the world above met the world below. 3 sets of ripples, each one a series of expanding circles that were moving with a speed and a regularity that was not natural, not wind, not current, not fish, but was the skip of something that was crossing the lake with a purpose and a direction and a destination. They were not staying in the lake, they were coming out. The farmer drove faster. He did not need to be told. He had seen the ripples too in the rearview mirror, and his foot was on the accelerator, and his hands were tight on the wheel, and his face was set in the hard, grim expression of a man who was doing the only thing he could do, which was drive. The valley disappeared. The hills fell away. The road reached the coast, and the coast was wide and open and bright with the gray, cold light of the Irish Sea, and the lake was behind them, a dark memory in a dark valley, and the ripples were not visible anymore, and the slapping sound was not audible anymore, and the only sound was the engine of the truck and the breathing of 4 people who had survived. Dylan looked out the rear window one more time. The road behind them was empty. The valley was a distant fold in the hills, green and gray and beautiful and full of something that should not exist. And on the road, on the tarmac, not the gravel, but the tarmac, the hard, dry, ordinary surface of the main road, there was a sound. A single slap. Wet. Heavy. The sound of something that had skipped across a lake and crossed a bog and climbed a slope and followed a creek and traversed a field and was now, for the first time, touching the surface of the road. And then another slap. And another. The rhythm accelerating, the sound growing, the thing or things approaching, skipping across the surface of the world that was not water but was close enough, was hard enough, was flat enough for something that needed a surface to bounce. The farmer looked in the rearview mirror. His face went white. His foot went down. The truck accelerated, the engine roaring, the speedometer climbing, the road unwinding ahead of them like a ribbon leading away from something that was following and would not stop following because the lake was not a prison. The valley was not a cage, and the surface of the world, all of it, every road, every field, every puddle and stream and river, was a surface that something could skip across if it wanted to badly enough. And behind them, growing fainter but not fading, never fading, the sound continued. Slap, slap, slap. The death tree. Stop looking at its eyes, for God's sake. Just keep your head down and keep walking. The words came from behind Nadia, spoken by a man she had met 3 hours ago, and whose name she could not remember because her brain had vacated the premises of rational thought approximately 4 minutes earlier when the trees around her had begun to breathe. The man was a guide, a local, hired by the estate to navigate the old logging roads that led to the site, and he was bleeding from both ears. The blood ran in thin, dark lines down the sides of his neck, disappearing into the collar of his flannel jacket, and he did not seem to notice, or if he noticed, he did not care, because whatever had caused the bleeding had also caused something else, something worse, something that had emptied his face of everything except the single, burning imperative to move, to keep moving, to not stop and not look and not listen to the sounds that were coming from the trees. Nadia kept walking. She kept her head down. She did not look at the trees, not because the guide had told her not to, but because she had looked at the trees once briefly, and what she had seen had made a permanent alteration to the architecture of her understanding, an alteration that was not a revelation but a demolition, the tearing down of a wall between the world she had lived in for 37 years and the world that had been there all along, behind the wall, waiting. She did not look at the trees, because the trees were looking at her. 6 days earlier, Nadia Corvino had been in her office at Boston University, a small, cluttered room on the 3rd floor of the anthropology building, overlooking the parking lot, decorated with photographs of burial sites and skeletal diagrams, and a single framed quote from Johann Blumenbach that read, "The dead are more eloquent than the living." She had been reviewing a grant proposal, her 4th rejection in 2 years, each one more politely worded than the last, each one saying the same thing in different language. Your work is interesting but not fundable. Your methods are sound but your subject matter is too niche. Your reputation precedes you, and the reputation is not good. She had been academically disgraced for 18 months, ever since the incident at the morgue in Baltimore, a disagreement with a colleague that had resulted in a formal complaint, a review board, and the quiet, bloodless execution of her career via non-renewal of contract. She was, in the parlance of academia, between positions, which meant unemployed, which meant broke, which meant desperate enough to take a call from a private client offering a fee that would cover her rent for 6 months. The client's name was Aldous Blackwood. He was the great-great-great-great-grandson of Ezekiel Blackwood, an 18th-century landowner, occultist, and according to the court records that Nadia had pulled from the Maine Historical Society, suspected murderer. Ezekiel Blackwood had owned a tract of land in the deep woods of central Maine, a 100-acre parcel that had been in the family since the colonial era, and on that land, in a depression in the earth where the trees grew in concentric circles, there was a burial plot. Not a cemetery. There were no headstones, no formal layout, no records of interment. It was a place where bodies had been put into the ground, dozens of them, over a period of decades, and the bodies had not been treated with the care that the dead usually receive. They had been placed, not buried, dropped, not laid to rest, and the ground around them, according to the surveyor's report that Aldous Blackwood had included in his initial contact, was warm, warm in October, warm in Maine, warm in a way that had no geological explanation. Aldous Blackwood wanted the site documented. He wanted it photographed, mapped, sampled, and described in a report that would allow him to petition the state for a permanent seal, a legal designation that would prevent anyone from disturbing the site, visiting the site, or even knowing the site existed. He wanted it buried, legally and literally, and he was willing to pay Nadia Corvino a significant amount of money to do the documentation, because Nadia Corvino was the only forensic anthropologist in New England who was both qualified enough to do the work and desperate enough to take it. Nadia had accepted without hesitation. She had been working with the dead for 15 years, first as a graduate student exhuming mass graves in the Balkans, then as a consultant for medical examiners, then as a professor whose specialty was ancient burial rites and the cultural practices surrounding death. She had handled bodies that were fresh and bodies that were ancient, bodies that had been buried with ceremony and bodies that had been discarded like garbage. She had learned to read the dead the way a geologist reads rock, to interpret the layers, the patterns, the evidence of what had happened and when and why. She was not easily disturbed. She was not superstitious. She was not the kind of person who believed in curses or ghosts or things that lived in the woods and ate people's souls. She was, in other words, exactly the kind of person who should have known better. The site was a 4-hour drive from Boston, north on I-95, then west on a series of increasingly narrow roads that degraded from paved to gravel to dirt to track, until the track ended at a gate, a rusted iron structure, 7 feet tall, set in a stone wall that ran the perimeter of the Blackwood property. The gate was locked. Nadia had been given a key, a heavy, old-fashioned thing, brass, engraved with a symbol she did not recognize, and she unlocked the gate and drove through, onto a track that was barely wider than her rental car, the trees closing overhead like the roof of a tunnel. The forest was different here. Nadia noticed it immediately, the way she noticed changes in soil composition or skeletal morphology, with the trained, instinctive eye of a scientist who had spent her career looking at things that other people walked past. The trees were wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way. There was no blight, no disease, no visible damage. They were healthy, too healthy. The pines were enormous, white pines mostly, their trunks 3 and 4 feet in diameter, their canopy so dense that the light beneath was a green, filtered twilight. But it was not the size that was wrong. It was the arrangement. The trees grew in circles, not metaphorically, literally. The trunks were spaced at regular intervals, forming rings that were visible from the track, each ring slightly smaller than the one outside it, like the growth rings of a tree made of trees. And the circles were concentric, centered on a point that was not visible from the track but that Nadia could feel, or rather, could infer from the geometry, a point somewhere deeper in the forest, a center, a focal point toward which the entire forest was oriented. "That's not natural," she said aloud to no one. She was alone in the car, the window down, the air cold and pine-scented and still. Her voice sounded thin in the silence of the forest, which was not silent but was the kind of quiet that felt like silence, the ambient hum of a forest that was alive but was not producing the sounds that forests usually produced. No bird song, no insect buzz, no wind in the canopy, just the low, close sound of her own breathing and the crunch of tires on the track. She parked at the end of the track, where the path was blocked by a fallen tree, a white pine enormous, its root ball appended and its trunk lying across the path like a barrier. She gathered her equipment, camera, GPS, sample kit, notebook, headlamp, the hunting knife that she carried in the field as a tool rather than a weapon, and she walked. The forest was warm, not the ambient warmth of a sunny day. There was no sun, the canopy was too thick, but a ground-level warmth, a radiant heat that rose from the soil and wrapped around her ankles and calves like a bath. Nadia stopped, knelt, and pressed her palm against the ground. The soil was warm, not slightly warm, not the residual heat of a sunny patch that had been shaded over. It was genuinely, noticeably warm, as if there was a heat source beneath the surface, as if the earth itself was generating heat. She pulled her sample kit and took a soil core, a cylindrical tube of dark, fibrous earth that was warm in her hand, warm in a way that soil in October in Maine should not be. She capped the sample and noted the temperature with her digital probe, 28 degrees Celsius, 82 degrees Fahrenheit, in October, in Maine, in a forest where the air temperature was 8 degrees. The soil was peat, dark, fibrous, rich in organic matter, the kind of soil that formed in bogs and marshes, not in upland pine forests. But there was no bog here. The ground was dry, the drainage was good, the terrain was elevated. The peat should not have been here, and the peat should not have been warm. Nadia photographed the sampling site, noted the GPS coordinates, and continued walking. The concentric circles of trees grew more pronounced as she moved inward, the rings tighter, the trunks larger, the spacing more regular. She counted 7 rings before she reached the center, and the center was a clearing, a roughly circular space, 30 meters across, where the trees stopped and the ground was open, covered in a thick layer of pine needles and the dark, warm peat that she had been walking on since the track ended. In the center of the clearing was the tree. It was a cedar, an eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana, but it was unlike any cedar Nadia had ever seen. It was enormous, its trunk 6 feet in diameter, its bark not the usual reddish-brown but a deep charcoal black, as if it had been burned. But it had not been burned. There was no charring, no cracking, no evidence of fire. The bark was black naturally, as if the tree had absorbed the light from the forest around it and stored it in its own skin, as if the tree was not reflecting the darkness but was the source of it. The canopy was dense and dark, a mass of needle-covered branches that spread over the clearing like a roof, blocking whatever light filtered through the surrounding pines, and creating a space that was not just shaded but dark. A deep, organic darkness that was different from the green twilight of the forest. A darkness that was not the absence of light, but the presence of something that displaced it. Nadia stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the tree, and the tree looked back. She did not have a scientific framework for this perception. The tree did not have eyes, did not have a face, did not have any feature that could be identified as a sensory organ. But the tree was aware of her. She felt it the way she felt the warmth of the soil, not through her eyes or her ears but through her skin, through the surface of her body, through the animal part of her brain that had been detecting threats and opportunities since before language, before tools, before the concept of a tree had been separated from the concept of a threat. The death tree. The name came to her unbidden, not from her training but from somewhere deeper, from the part of the brain that stores the old knowledge, the knowledge that humans carried out of the forests of their origin and into the cities and the laboratories, and the institutions where they tried to bury it under layers of rationality and method. The death tree. She did not know where the name came from. She did not know what it meant. But she knew, with the same bone-deep certainty with which she knew the soil was warm and the trees were wrong, that the name was correct. She spent the first day documenting the site. She photographed the clearing from every angle, mapping the tree rings with her GPS, taking soil samples at regular intervals, noting the temperature gradient. The soil was warmest at the center near the cedar and cooled gradually with distance, reaching the ambient temperature of 8 degrees at the outermost ring. She documented the burial features, shallow depressions in the earth, roughly rectangular, arranged in rows radiating outward from the cedar like the spokes of a wheel. There were at least 40 of them, possibly more, some so shallow and overgrown that they were visible only as slight variations in the ground cover. She did not excavate. Aldous Blackwood had been specific about that. Document only. Do not disturb. Do not dig. Do not remove anything from the site. She noticed 2 things that first day that she filed under anomalies and did not dwell on, because dwelling on them would have required her to step outside the framework of her training and into a space that she was not prepared to enter. The first was the silence. The clearing was silent, not the quiet of a forest, but the silence of a room that has been emptied, the silence of a space where everything alive has chosen to be somewhere else. No birds, no insects, no wind. The air was still, warm, heavy with the scent of pine and peat and something else, something she could not identify, a smell that was not organic and not chemical but was somewhere in between, a smell that was like the taste of copper on the back of the tongue. The second was the feeling of being watched, not by the tree she had already registered that, had already filed it under subjective perception and moved on, but by something else. Something that was not the tree and was not the forest and was not the sky but was somewhere in between. Something that occupied the space between the visible and the invisible, between the material and the immaterial. Something that was there but could not be seen. Something that was aware of her but did not make itself known. Something that was waiting. She left the clearing at dusk, walking back along the path to her car, and she drove to the motel in the nearest town, a crossroads called Greenton, which was less a town than a collection of houses, a gas station and a diner that served breakfast all day. She checked in, ate a sandwich, reviewed her notes and went to bed. She slept poorly. She dreamed of the tree, a dream that was not a nightmare but was worse, a dream in which the tree was not a tree but a body, a vast, dark body that was lying beneath the earth, its skin the color of charcoal, its limbs the size of tree trunks, its mouth, if it had a mouth, open. Breathing, drawing the warmth of the world down into itself, consuming it, metabolizing it, converting it into something that was not heat and not life, but was the opposite of both, a negation, a void, a hunger that was so old it had become the landscape itself. She woke at 300, sweating, the motel room cold and dark, and she lay in bed and listened to the silence, and the silence was not silent. There was a sound beneath the silence, a low, rhythmic sound that was like breathing but was not breathing, like a heartbeat but was not a heartbeat, a sound that was coming from outside the window, from the parking lot, from the trees that lined the road, a sound that was everywhere and nowhere and was, she realized with a chill that went to the marrow, the same sound she had heard in her dream. She did not look out the window. She pulled the blanket to her chin and lay there, awake, until the sun came up and the sound stopped and the ordinary world resumed its ordinary operations, and she was able to get out of bed and make coffee and pretend, for a few hours, that the previous day had been a normal day, and the night had been a normal night, and the sound beneath the silence had been the furnace or the highway or the wind or anything other than what it was. On the second day, she hired the guide. His name was Wayne Murphy, and he was recommended by the gas station attendant in Greenton, who described him as the one who knows the woods. Wayne was 50, lean, weathered, with the kind of face that looked like it had been left out in the rain for decades, and the kind of eyes that looked at you the way a dog looks at a stranger, not with hostility, but with a wariness that was born from experience, from having been in places where the wrong step or the wrong question could lead to consequences that were not physical, but were nonetheless permanent. He charged $200 a day and asked no questions about what Nadia was doing in the woods, and when she told him the name of the property, Blackwood, he nodded once slowly and said, "I know the place. I'll take you there, but we're back by dark. No exceptions." "Why?" Nadia asked. Wayne looked at her. His eyes were the kind of gray that was almost colorless, washed out, as if the color had been leached out of them by years of looking at things that drained color from the world. "Because the woods change after dark," he said, "and I don't mean the light." Nadia did not ask what he meant. She packed her equipment and they drove to the gate and they walked the track to the clearing, and Wayne stopped at the edge of the concentric rings and did not go further. "I'll wait here," he said. He was looking at the trees, not at the clearing, not at the death tree, but at the rings, the concentric circles of pine that surrounded the site like the walls of a fortress or the rings of a target. "How long do you need?" "A few hours," Nadia said. "I need to photograph the burial features and take more samples." "Stay on the path, stay in the open, don't go under the cedar." He paused. "And if you hear something that sounds like it's talking to you, something that sounds like someone you know, don't answer. Don't look toward it, just walk back here. Walk straight back here and don't stop and don't look." Nadia looked at him. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to dismiss this as rural superstition, the same way she had dismissed the warning about the lake that she had read about in a case study years ago, the same way she dismissed every warning that was not backed by data and methodology, and the peer-reviewed consensus of people who had been to the places they were warning about and had come back with evidence. But she did not laugh, because Wayne's face was not the face of a man who was being superstitious. It was the face of a man who was giving instructions, the way a fire captain gives instructions, the way a commanding officer gives instructions, clearly, simply, and with the understanding that the instructions would be followed because the alternative was not something that could be discussed. "I understand," Nadia said. Wayne nodded. He sat down on a stone at the edge of the ring, his back to a pine, his hands on his knees, and he closed his eyes. He was not sleeping. He was listening. Nadia walked into the clearing. She spent the morning photographing the burial features. She had brought a DSLR with a macro lens and a tripod, and she set up at each depression, documenting the size, shape, orientation, and depth of the features with the methodical precision that was the only thing she trusted completely. The depressions were shallow, 6 to 12 inches deep, and roughly rectangular, oriented with the long axis pointing toward the cedar, as if the bodies had been placed facing the tree, or as if the tree had been drawing them in, pulling them toward itself, the way a drain pulls water. She found the cairn at 1430. It was on the western side of the clearing, half buried in pine needles and the dark, warm peat, a collapsed heap of stones that had once been a structured pile, a burial marker, she thought, or a cover for something that someone had wanted to keep buried. The stones were local, granite, gray, moss-covered, but they were arranged in a pattern that was not random and was not decorative. It was functional. The stones had been placed to seal something, to close something, to keep something in. She photographed the cairn from 6 angles, noting the arrangement of the stones, the degree of collapse, the presence of organic material, roots, pine needles, peat, between the stones, indicating that the cairn had been in place for a long time. She estimated its age at 200 years, give or take 50, based on the growth of the moss and the degree of root intrusion. This was consistent with the Blackwood family history. Ezekiel Blackwood had been active in the late 1700s, and the cairn could have been one of his constructions, a seal placed over something that he had wanted to contain. She was photographing the last stone when she heard the sound. It was not a scream, it was not a voice. It was a click, a rhythmic, wet clicking like a tongue striking the roof of a mouth, repeated in a pattern that was not random but was intentional, a signal, a communication, the sound of something that was using its mouth to produce a sound that was not speech but was language. A language that was not made of words but was made of something older and more fundamental, a language that was spoken by the body, by the mouth, by the tongue and the teeth and the palate, a language that preceded words by millions of years and had never needed them. Nadia turned her flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the green twilight of the clearing, illuminating the pine needles, the warm peat, the stones of the cairn, and then, beyond the cairn, at the edge of the tree line, in the space between 2 concentric rings of pine where the darkness was deepest and the light was weakest, the figure. It was gray, not the gray of stone or the gray of cloud or the gray of old wood. It was the gray of skin, parchment-like, translucent, stretched over a frame that was too long for a human, the limbs elongated, the torso narrow, the head small and pointed, the proportions wrong in a way that was not deformity but was something else. Something that had once been human and had been changed, stretched, pulled, the way taffy is pulled, the body drawn out and thinned and dried until what remained was not a person but a memory of a person, a sketch, a rough draft that had been abandoned before it was finished. It was dressed, or rather it was partially covered, in tatters of what had once been ceremonial hide. The hide was old, cracked, stained with something that was too dark to be dirt and too old to be blood, and it hung from the figure's body in strips, the way bark hangs from a dead tree, loose and flaking, more decoration than clothing. The figure's feet were bare, and they were wrong, too long, the toes too extended, the soles dark and cracked, the feet of something that had walked on them for so long that they had become part of the ground. The clicking continued. It was coming from the figure's mouth, which was open, not wide, not gaping, but slightly open, the lips drawn back, revealing teeth that were not teeth. They were needles, thin, sharp, translucent, arranged in rows that were too numerous and too regular, the teeth of something that had evolved to do one thing with its mouth, and had been doing it for so long that the mouth had become a specialized organ, a tool, a device. Nia looked at the figure looked at Nadia, their eyes met. The moment of eye contact lasted less than a second. A fraction of a second, the time it takes for light to travel from one retina to another, for one brain to register the gaze of another. But in that fraction of a second, something happened. Something that Nadia felt not in her mind but in her body, in the base of her skull, in the pit of her stomach, in the space behind her eyes where vision is processed and interpreted and turned into the world that we see. The world changed. It was not a visual change. The trees did not move. The ground did not shift. The sky did not darken. But the quality of the world, the texture, the feel, the meaning of the landscape around her, underwent a transformation that was so complete and so immediate that Nadia staggered, her hand going to her head, her flashlight dropping to the ground, the beam spinning on the pine needles like a searchlight in a prison yard. The forest no longer looked like trees. It looked like a body. The trunks were ribs, the canopy was a diaphragm, the ground was a lining, the peat was tissue, the warmth was metabolic, the silence was the silence of a living thing that was too large to be heard. The forest was not a forest. It was an organ, a digestive organ, and Nadia was inside it. She blinked. She shook her head. She told herself it was a hallucination, a stress response, a migraine aura, a transient disruption of her visual processing caused by the anomalous sensory environment. She told herself this, and for a moment the world returned to normal. The trees were trees, the ground was ground, the sky was sky. And then the normalcy slid away again, like a mask peeling off, and beneath it was the body, the organ, the living architecture of something that was not a forest but was wearing a forest the way a person wears a coat. And beneath that, beneath the visual transformation, beneath the hallucination or the revelation or whatever it was, there was another change, a deeper change, a sensory change, a change that was not in what she saw but in what she heard. She could hear heartbeats, not her own. She could hear her own, of course, the steady, accelerating thud of her own cardiac muscle, but beneath that, around it, above it, there were others. Dozens, hundreds. The heartbeats of every living thing within a mile, mice in the undergrowth, birds in the canopy, insects in the bark, worms in the soil, the vast, layered, deafening percussion of a forest's worth of circulatory systems all beating at once, all pumping, all alive, all audible, all pouring into her ears like water into a cup that was already full and was overflowing. The sound was unbearable, not loud, not in the way that a jet engine is loud or a thunderclap is loud, but unbearable in the way that a weight is unbearable, a pressure, a force that was pushing against the inside of her skull, compressing her brain, squeezing her thoughts, making it impossible to concentrate, to focus, to think. She could hear the heartbeat of a shrew 10 meters away, a rapid, fluttering pulse, 800 beats per minute. She could hear the heartbeat of a deer 50 meters away, slow, heavy, deliberate. She could hear the heartbeat of a beetle on the bark of the nearest pine, a barely perceptible, impossibly fast vibration, the rhythm of a life so small and so brief that hearing it felt like a violation, an intrusion into a private biological act. She could hear everything, and the everything was deafening. She turned and ran. She ran for the edge of the clearing, her flashlight abandoned, her sample kit abandoned, her camera abandoned, her legs carrying her across the warm peat and the pine needles with a speed that was powered not by fitness, but by the desperate, animal need to get out, to get away, to put distance between herself and the figure and the tree and the sound and the world that was no longer the world she had known. She reached Wayne. He was standing. He had heard her running, had heard the change in the forest, had felt whatever it was that she had felt, because he was bleeding from the ears, the blood running down his neck, and his face was white, and his hands were shaking, and he grabbed her by the arm and said the words that she would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. "Stop looking at its eyes, for God's sake. Just keep your head down and keep walking." They walked. They did not run. Running, Wayne would later tell her, was a trigger, a signal, a way of saying "I am prey" in a language that the forest understood. They walked, their heads down, their eyes on the ground, their bodies moving through the concentric rings of pine trees with the deliberate, measured pace of people who were trying to be invisible, trying to be nothing, trying to be less than the warmth they carried and the heartbeats they produced and the breath that fogged in the cold air. And behind them in the clearing the clicking continued. It did not follow them. It did not need to. The clicking was not a pursuit. It was a marking, a tagging, the acoustic equivalent of a fingerprint on a file. The thing had looked at Nadia. The thing had been seen. And in the exchange of gaze, in that fraction of a second when their eyes had met and the world had changed, something had been passed, something had been transferred, something had been opened that could not be closed. A door, in her mind. A door that was now standing open, and through it, pouring like water, like sound, like the heartbeat of every living thing within a mile, was the world that the thing inhabited, the world that was not a forest but a body, the world that was not a place but a process, a digestion, a consumption, a hunger that had been waiting for someone to open the door and look through it and see what was on the other side. Nadia had seen it, and it had seen her, and the door was open, and it would not close. The motel room was small and cold and smelled of mildew and industrial cleaner, and Nadia sat on the bed with the lights on and the curtains drawn and the television turned up loud, and she could hear everything. Not the television. The television was a wall of sound, a barrage of voices and music and commercials that she had turned on to drown out the other sounds, the sounds that were not coming from the television but were coming from outside, from the parking lot, from the road, from the woods that lined the road, from the town of Greenton and the forest beyond it and the world beyond that. She could hear heartbeats. She could hear the fluttering pulse of the sparrows nesting under the motel's eaves. She could hear the slow, heavy rhythm of the dog sleeping in the room next door, a Labrador, she thought, based on the size and pace of the heartbeat. She could hear the mouse in the wall behind the headboard, its heart a rapid, tinny vibration, 1,200 beats per minute, the frantic percussion of a life so small that it existed on the edge of audibility. She could hear the crickets. She could hear their individual heartbeats, not their chirping, which was a different sound, a mating call, a communication, but the actual beating of their tiny, transparent hearts, the pumping of their hemolymph, the circulatory rhythm of organisms so small and so numerous that their collective sound was a buzz, a hum, a static that filled her ears and her head and her mind and made it impossible to think. She had not slept, not the first night, not the second. The sensory bleed, the name she had given it, a clinical, diagnostic name for something that was not clinical and was not diagnostic and was not anything that she had been trained to handle, had been continuous since the moment of eye contact in the clearing. It did not stop. It did not diminish. It did not adapt, the way the senses usually adapt to constant stimuli, the way the nose stops smelling a persistent odor or the ears stop hearing a steady hum. It was always there, always new, always fresh, always flooding her auditory system with data that her brain was not designed to process. She had tried earplugs, foam, silicone, wax, 3 different types inserted as deeply as she could push them without causing pain. They blocked the external sounds, the television, the traffic, the wind, but they did not block the heartbeats. The heartbeats were not coming through her ears. They were coming through something else, something that was not the auditory canal and was not the tympanic membrane and was not the cochlea but was some other channel, some other pathway, some other mechanism that had been opened by the eye contact and was now receiving signals that bypassed the physical sensory apparatus entirely and arrived directly in the brain, the way a radio receives a signal, the way a receiver tunes to a frequency, the way an antenna picks up a wave. She could hear the forest. Not the forest around the motel, the forest 40 miles away, the Blackwood property, the clearing with the death tree and the concentric rings and the warm peat and the thing that lived there. She could hear it breathing. Not metaphorically. She could hear the actual respiration of the ecosystem, the exchange of gases between the trees and the soil and the atmosphere, the slow, vast, rhythmic exhalation of a forest that was not just a collection of trees but was a single organism, a superorganism, a body that breathed and consumed and digested, and was, right now in the dark, in the cold, in the place where she had been and should not have been, awake. And it was listening. She could hear it listening. She could hear the silence, the attentive, focused silence of something that was straining to hear, the way a person strains to hear a whisper in a noisy room. The forest was straining to hear her. It was trying to detect her heartbeat, not her physical heartbeat which was in her chest, but the signature of her consciousness, the electromagnetic noise that her brain produced when it was active, the sound of her thinking, the sound of her fear. She tried to stop thinking. She sat on the bed in the cold, in the light, with the television screaming and the earplugs in and the curtains drawn, and she tried to stop thinking, to make her mind blank, to silence the internal monologue that was the sound of her consciousness. She could not do it. The fear was too loud. The fear was a sound, a high, sustained, keening sound that was not in her ears but was in her brain, the sound of an animal in distress, the sound of a prey species that has been detected by a predator and is broadcasting its terror to every receiver in range. And the forest heard it. She felt the moment when it heard, the shift in the quality of the silence, the change from listening to found, the transition from searching to tracking. Something out there, something in the dark, something in the woods 40 miles away had detected her fear, had locked onto it, had begun to move. Wayne called at 800. His voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a man who had not slept and who was speaking through a mouth that was dry and a throat that was tight. "You need to leave," he said. "Not the motel, Maine. You need to get in your car and drive south and not stop until you're in Boston or New York or somewhere that's not here." "What happened to you?" Nadia asked. Her own voice was a croak. She had not spoken to another person in 24 hours, and her vocal cords felt like they were made of sandpaper. "My ears," Wayne said. "I'm bleeding, both ears. The doctor says my eardrums are intact, but he can't explain the bleeding. He says there's no trauma, no infection, no perforation, just blood coming from somewhere inside." He paused. "I can hear things, Ms. Corvino. Things I shouldn't be able to hear. I can hear the mice in my walls. I can hear my neighbor's dog dreaming. I can hear—" He stopped again, and the pause was longer this time, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I can hear it. The thing in the woods, it's calling me. It's using my voice. My own voice calling me by my name, telling me to come back." "Don't go back," Nadia said. "Whatever you hear, don't go back." "I know," Wayne said. "I know that. I'm not going back, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't need me to go back. It already has me. Whatever it did to us in the clearing, it already did it. The door is open, Ms. Corvino, in here." He tapped something, his skull, she thought, the sound of a knuckle against bone. "And I can't close it." The line went dead. Nadia called back 3 times, no answer. She called the gas station in Greenton and asked about Wayne Murphy. The attendant, a different one, a younger man, said, "Wayne's not here. Nobody's seen him since yesterday. His truck's gone." Nadia sat on the bed and held the phone and listened to the heartbeats of the sparrows under the eaves and the Labrador next door and the mouse in the wall and the crickets in the grass and the forest 40 miles away. And she knew that Wayne was already dead. Not because she had evidence, not because she had data or a body or a witness statement, but because she could hear it. She could hear the silence where Wayne's heartbeat had been. She could hear the absence. She could hear the space where a man had been and was no longer, the way she could hear the space where a note had been after the music stops, the residual silence, the echo of a sound that was no longer being made. The thing had taken him. It had called and he had answered, Not with his body, not by driving to the woods, but with his mind, with his attention, with the part of his consciousness that the door had opened and that the thing could now reach through. It had called, and the calling had been enough, and the door had widened, and Wayne's mind had been pulled through it, and his body, wherever it was, in his truck, on a road, in a ditch, had simply stopped. Nadia did not leave. She should have. Every rational impulse, every survival instinct, every fiber of her trained, skeptical, scientifically minded brain was telling her to get in the car and drive south and never come back. But there was another impulse, stronger than the rational ones, an impulse that was not rational and was not survival, and was not anything that could be explained by the framework of her training. It was the impulse to understand. It was the need to know. It was the thing that had driven her into anthropology in the first place, not the desire to classify or categorize or catalog, but the need to understand what happened to people when they died, what they became, what was left when the body was finished and the breath was gone and the warmth had left the skin, and the world had to decide what to do with the remainder. She needed to know what the thing was. She needed to know what the death tree was. She needed to know what the door was and what was on the other side of it and whether it could be closed. And beneath that need, beneath the scientific curiosity and the professional drive and the desperate human need to understand, there was something else, something darker, something that was not hers, something that had come through the door with the sensory bleed, something that was sitting in the back of her mind like a passenger in a car, quiet, patient, watching, waiting for the moment when she would stop resisting and let it in. She went back to the woods. She arrived at the site at noon on the third day. The gate was open. She was sure she had locked it, but the chain was hanging loose and the padlock was missing and the gate was standing wide, the iron bars rusted and the stone walls crumbling and the track beyond it dark and narrow and waiting. She drove through, parked at the fallen tree, and walked. The forest was different. The change was subtle, not a visual change, not an audible change, but a shift in the quality of the space, the way the air feels different before a thunderstorm, the way a room feels different when someone has been in it while you were out. The forest had been entered, not by Nadia, by the thing. The thing had moved. It had left the clearing, had walked through the concentric rings, had passed along the track, had gone to the gate and through it and out, and the evidence was everywhere, in the warmth of the soil, which was warmer now than it had been 2 days ago, 30 degrees instead of 28. In the smell, which was stronger now, the copperandrot scent that had been a background note and was now a dominant chord. In the silence, which was deeper, more complete, more absolute, as if every living thing in the forest had not merely left but had been consumed, eaten, digested, incorporated into the body of the organism that was the forest. Nadia walked to the clearing. The death tree was there. It was always there. It would always be there. It was the anchor, the center, the heart of the organism that was the forest and the thing and the warm soil and the concentric rings. But the thing was not there. The figure with the gray skin and the needle teeth and the tattered hide was not in the clearing. The clicking was not audible. The air was warm and still and empty. But the cairn was open. The stones that she had photographed, documented, mapped, they had been moved. Not scattered, not collapsed, but removed, one by one, as if by hands that had carefully disassembled the structure from above, lifting each stone and setting it aside, revealing what lay beneath. And what lay beneath was a hole. A shaft, vertical, dark, descending into the earth at the center of the cairn, its walls lined with the same warm, dark peat that covered the clearing, its depth impossible to determine, because the darkness at the bottom was absolute. Not the darkness of a deep hole, but the darkness of a throat, the darkness of something that was not empty but was full, full of something that was not air and was not earth, and was not anything that could be named. Nadia did not approach the hole. She stood at the edge of the clearing, 20 meters from the cairn, and she looked at the hole, and the hole looked back. She could feel it, the attention of whatever was down there, the awareness, the focus, the hunger. And she could hear it, the heartbeat. Not a human heartbeat, not an animal heartbeat, but something else, something slower, something deeper, something that beat once every 10 seconds, a rhythm so vast and so slow that it was less a sound and more a tectonic event, the pulse of something that was so large that its circulatory system operated on a geological timescale. The thing beneath the cairn, the thing beneath the death tree, the thing beneath the forest, the thing that was the forest, it was down there. It had always been down there. And the cairn, the stones that Ezekiel Blackwood had placed 200 years ago, had been the seal, the lid, the cover that kept it in. And something had removed the stones. Something had opened the hole. Something had unsealed the seal. Nadia backed away. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the clearing, on the cairn, on the hole, as she retreated through the concentric rings, moving backwards, step by step, her feet finding the path by memory, her body moving with the slow, deliberate caution of a person who is trying to leave a room without waking the thing that is sleeping in it. She reached the track. She turned. She walked fast, not running, not yet, but fast, the path unwinding before her, the gate visible through the trees, the fallen tree visible beyond the gate, the car visible beyond the fallen tree, the road visible beyond the car. And then the voice came. It was her father's voice. Not a memory, not an impression, not the vague, dreamlike echo of a familiar voice that the brain produces when it is stressed or grieving. It was her father's voice, exact, specific, with the particular timbre and cadence and accent that she had spent 30 years listening to and could distinguish from any other voice on earth. He was calling her name. Nadia, Nadia, come here. I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something. Nadia, please. Her father had been dead for 4 years. He had died in a hospital in Providence, Rhode Island, from pancreatic cancer, and Nadia had been at his bedside, holding his hand when the monitors went flat. She had heard his last heartbeat, the slowing, the irregularity, the final, solitary thud that was not followed by another. She had heard it with her physical ears in a physical room, and she had noted it, clinically, dispassionately, the way she noted everything, the way she had been trained to note everything, because noting was how she survived, how she processed, how she kept the world at a distance that was safe enough to function in. And now she was hearing it again. His heartbeat. Not a memory, the actual sound, the actual rhythm, the actual cardiac signature of a man who was dead and buried and whose heart had been stopped for 4 years and whose body had been reduced to calcium and phosphorus, and the dry mineral remnants of a life that had ended. She could hear his heartbeat. It was coming from the clearing, from the direction of the death tree, from the direction of the hole. Nadia, please, I'm scared. I'm scared, Nadia, come help me. She stopped walking. She stood on the track, the gate 20 meters ahead, the car 40 meters beyond that, the road and the world and the safety of the ordinary beyond that. And the voice was behind her, and the heartbeat was behind her, and the warmth of the soil was rising through the soles of her boots, and the copperandrot smell was in her nose, and the sensory bleed was filling her head with the heartbeats of every living thing within a mile, and the heartbeat of one dead thing that should not have been audible but was. That was louder than all the others, that was drowning them out, that was filling her ears and her mind and her body with the sound of a heart that she had loved and lost and mourned, and was now hearing again, and could not bear to hear again, and could not bear to stop hearing. She did not answer, she did not look back, she kept walking. She walked through the gate, past the car, to the road, and she got in the car and she drove, and she did not stop driving until she was in the motel room with the lights on, and the television up and the earplugs in, and the curtains drawn, and the door locked, and the world shut out as much as she could shut it out. Which was not enough, which was never enough, because the door was open and the sounds were coming through, and the voice of her dead father was still in her ears, still calling her name, still asking her to come back, and the worst part of all of it, was that some part of her wanted to go back. Some part of her, the part that missed her father, the part that had never fully processed his death, the part that had been holding his hand when the monitors went flat, and had noted the last heartbeat and had filed it away and had never cried, not once, not in 4 years. Because crying was not clinical and not professional, and not the kind of thing that forensic anthropologists did. The part of her that was not a scientist but was a daughter, that part wanted to go back. That part was listening to the voice. That part was leaning toward it. That part was opening the door a little wider. Nadia sat on the bed and pressed her hands against her ears, and pressed her eyes shut, and pressed her back against the headboard and held on. She held on the way a person holds on to a railing on a ship in a storm, not because the railing will save them, but because letting go is worse. Because letting go means falling, and falling means reaching the bottom. And the bottom is the place where the voice is coming from, the place where the heartbeat is, the place where the thing in the hole is waiting with its gray skin, and its needle teeth, and its mouth that clicks like a tongue, and its patience that has no limit, and its hunger that has no end. She held on. She held on through the night. She held on while the voice called and the heartbeat pulsed and the sensory bleed roared and the door in her mind widened, millimeter by millimeter, and the world on the other side of the door, the world that was not a forest but a body, the world that was not a place but a digestion, pressed against the opening and pushed and pushed and pushed. She held on, and at dawn the voice stopped, the heartbeat faded. The sensory bleed retreated, not gone, not silent, but reduced, pulled back like a tide, leaving her on the shore of her own mind, gasping, shaking, alive, but changed, permanently changed. The door was still open. It would always be open. But for a few hours in the daylight, the thing on the other side was quiet, and Nadia could think, and thinking was the only weapon she had left. She thought about the tree, about the warm soil, about the peat that was not peat but was something else, something combustible, something rich in organic matter and ancient carbon, something that burned. She thought about the cairn and the seal and the thing in the hole and the voice and the heartbeat and the sensory bleed and the door. And she formed a plan. Not a good plan. Not a plan that a scientist would approve of or a survival expert would endorse. But a plan that was the only plan she had, because the alternative was to keep holding on, and holding on was getting harder, and the railing was getting slippery, and the storm was getting worse, and the bottom was getting closer. She was going to burn the death tree. She returned to the site at dawn on the 4th day. She had driven to the hardware store in Greenton and bought what she needed: a butane torch, 2 cans of charcoal starter, a box of long-stemmed matches, and a roll of duct tape. She had also bought a flare gun, a marine emergency flare, the kind that fires a bright, hot projectile that burns at 1,500 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds, from the marine supply store in the next town over. She did not know if fire would work. She did not know if anything would work. But fire was the oldest weapon, the first technology that humans had developed specifically to reshape the world, and the death tree was part of the world, and if the world could be reshaped, then so could the tree. She did not bring Wayne. Wayne was gone. She did not bring anyone. This was her fight now, not because she was brave, but because she was the only one left and the door was in her mind, and the thing on the other side of the door was not going to stop pushing until the door was wide enough to step through, and once it stepped through, it would not need the door anymore. It would be inside her, inside the world, and the warm soil and the concentric rings and the death tree and the cairn and the hole and the thing in the hole would all be one thing, one body, one organism, consuming the world from the inside out. She parked at the fallen tree. She gathered her supplies. She walked the track to the gate, through the gate into the forest, into the concentric rings, into the clearing. The death tree was there, black, vast, dark, breathing. The cairn was open. The hole was there, the shaft descending into the earth, the darkness at the bottom absolute and attentive. And the thing, the Skudakumooch, the name she had found in a book in the Greenton library, a Wabanaki word that meant the ghost witch of the woods, was standing at the base of the death tree. It was not hiding. It was not lurking. It was standing in the open in the daylight, its gray, parchment skin visible in the green twilight of the clearing, Its elongated body unfolded to its full height, 7 feet, maybe 8, the proportions wrong, the limbs too long, the torso too narrow, the head too small. Its tattered hide hung from its body in strips. Its feet were bare, the toes gripping the warm peat. Its hands, long-fingered, gray-skinned, the nails dark and curved, hung at its sides, and its mouth was open, not wide, slightly, the way a person opens their mouth when they are about to speak. The needle teeth were visible, arranged in their concentric rows, and the clicking was coming from the throat, not the tongue, the throat, a deep, wet, rhythmic percussion that was the sound of the thing breathing, the sound of its existence, the sound of its patience. It was looking at her. It did not have eyes. The face was featureless, the same flat gray expanse that she had seen 2 days ago, but it was looking at her. She could feel its gaze, not on her skin, not on her face, but inside her skull, inside the space where the door was, inside the opening that the eye contact had created. It was looking through the door. It was looking at her through the door that it had opened in her mind, and what it saw, what it was studying, what it was mapping, was not her face or her body or her shape, but her fear, her memories, her attachments, the people she loved and the people she had lost, and the things she could not bear to lose. It was finding her father. It was finding his voice. It was finding the shape of his heartbeat, the rhythm of his cardiac signature, the exact frequency of his love for her, and it was preparing to play it back, to use it, to turn the most precious thing she had into a weapon against her. "Don't," Nadia said. Her voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a woman who had been holding on for 3 days and had run out of fear, and had passed through the other side into something that was not courage but was beyond courage, was the state that comes after all the other states have been exhausted, the state of a person who has nothing left to lose and is therefore capable of anything. The thing clicked. The clicking was a response, not words, not language, but communication, the way a predator's growl is communication, a warning and a promise and an announcement of intent all at once. It was telling her that it did not need her permission. It was telling her that the door was already open. It was telling her that the voice was already inside her head waiting, and that all it needed to do was press play. And then it did. "Nadia," her father's voice, clear, warm, loving, exact. "Nadia, sweetheart, I need you to come to me. I'm alone, Nadia, I'm scared. I've been alone for so long, please." The voice was not coming from the thing. The thing's mouth was moving, the clicking continued, the needle teeth visible, but the voice was not coming from the thing's mouth. It was coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the soil, from the air. From inside Nadia's head, from the space behind the door, from the place where the thing had built its nest in her mind, and was now using the materials it found there, the memories, the recordings, the acoustic archives of 30 years of hearing her father's voice, to construct a sound that was indistinguishable from the original. It was not mimicking her father. It was being her father. It had taken the data, the sound, the rhythm, the emotional content of every conversation she had ever had with him, and it was using it to create a version of him that was perfect, a copy that was indistinguishable from the original, a ghost that was not a memory but was a living, speaking, feeling presence in her mind, as real as the thing in the clearing, as real as the tree, as real as the warm soil beneath her feet. And the voice was saying things that her father had never said, things that were designed to bypass her defenses, to go around the rational, skeptical, scientifically trained mind and straight to the part of her that was a daughter, the part that had held his hand when the monitors went flat, the part that had noted the last heartbeat and filed it away and never cried. "I'm scared, Nadia, I'm so cold, it's dark in here. Please come get me, please, I'm your father, I need you." Nadia felt the pull. Not physical, psychic, emotional, gravitational. The pull was the door widening, the thing pressing through, the world on the other side of the door, the world that was a body, a digestion, a hunger, expanding into her mind, taking up space, displacing her thoughts, replacing them with its thoughts, her perceptions with its perceptions, her reality with its reality. She felt the forest change. The trees became ribs, the canopy became a diaphragm, the soil became a lining, the warm peat became tissue, the clearing became a chamber, a stomach, a womb, a mouth. And the thing at the base of the death tree was not standing in the clearing. It was standing in the throat of the organism, and the organism was swallowing, and Nadia was the food. She fought it. She fought it the way she had fought it for 3 days, with her mind, with her training, with the disciplined, methodical, scientifically rigorous framework that was the only structure she had that was strong enough to resist the pull. She named what was happening. This is a psychic attack. The entity is using cached auditory memory to create a parasitic emotional response. The voice is not real. The voice is data. The heartbeat is not real. The heartbeat is a recording. The forest is not a body. The forest is a forest. She said this aloud, standing in the clearing, her hands at her sides, her eyes on the thing, her voice steady and loud, and filled with the desperate, furious energy of a person who is arguing with the universe, and knows she is losing but will not stop arguing because stopping means surrender, and surrender means the door, and the door means the thing, and the thing means the end of everything she is. The thing smiled. The needle teeth spread apart, the mouth widening, the gray skin stretching, and the smile was not a human smile. It was too wide, too symmetrical, too deliberate, the smile of something that had learned what a smile was by watching humans do it, and had reproduced the mechanics without understanding the meaning. It was the smile of a mask. It was the smile of something that was wearing a face the way it was wearing the forest, as a disguise, as a lure, as a way of saying I am like you, when it was not like her at all. And the voice continued, Nadia, don't fight it, don't fight me. I'm your father, I love you, I just want to be with you. Is that so wrong? Is it wrong to want to be with your daughter? The voice was in her head, and it was everywhere, and it was her father's voice. And it was not her father's voice, and the distinction between the two was dissolving. The way a shoreline dissolves in a flood, the water rising, the land shrinking, the boundary between what was real and what was not becoming less defined with every word, every beat of the phantom heartbeat, every pulse of the warm soil beneath her feet. Nadia reached for the flare gun. She pulled it from her jacket pocket, the heavy, orange, marine flare gun that she had bought at the marine supply store, and she aimed it at the thing. Not at the thing's body, at the thing's face. At the flat, gray, featureless expanse where eyes should have been. At the smile. At the needle teeth. At the mouth that was producing the clicking that was the sound of the thing's existence. She pulled the trigger. The flare hit the thing in the face. The projectile was small, 12 gauge, but it burned at 1,500 degrees Celsius, and the impact was enough to stagger the creature, its head snapping back, the gray skin blistering and blackening where the flare struck, the smell of burning skin and something else, something dry, something old, something that smelled like dust and parchment and the inside of a tomb, filling the clearing. The thing did not scream. It did not flinch. It did not fall. It stood there, its head tilted back, the flare burning against its face, the fire consuming the gray skin, revealing what was beneath, not bone, not muscle, but nothing. The skin burned away, and beneath it was nothing. No skull, no structure, no anatomy, just a void, a darkness, a hole in the shape of a face that was the same darkness as the hole in the cairn, the same darkness as the shaft that descended into the earth. The same darkness that was not empty but was full, full of the same attention, the same awareness, the same hunger. The wound closed. Nadia watched it happen, the skin regenerating, flowing inward from the edges of the burn, the gray tissue knitting itself together like a zipper closing, the surface restoring itself to its original state in a matter of seconds. The flare fell to the ground, still burning, the phosphorus eating into the warm peat. The thing looked at her again, looked through the door in her mind, through the opening that was wider now, that had widened during the attack, that had been fed by her fear and her grief, and the sound of her father's voice calling her name. And the thing spoke, not in her father's voice, not in any human voice, in its own voice, A voice that was not a voice but was a sound, a vibration, a frequency that was felt in the bones and the teeth and the base of the skull, a sound that was the acoustic equivalent of the smile. Learned, reproduced, mechanical, without understanding, without meaning, without anything behind it except the hunger. You cannot kill what has already surrendered its soul, the thing said, and the words were not English, were not any language, were the clicking modulated into a pattern that Nadia's brain interpreted as words because her brain was desperate for meaning, for communication, for the comfort of a voice in the dark, even if the voice was the voice of the thing that was eating her mind. Nadia did not answer. She dropped the flare gun. She pulled the hunting knife from her belt, the heavy, fixed-blade knife that she carried in the field, the one she used for cutting samples and splitting soil, and the 100 small, practical tasks that fieldwork required, and she lunged. She drove the knife into the thing's chest. The blade was 8 inches long, high-carbon steel, sharp enough to shave with, and it sank into the thing's body up to the hilt with a sound that was not the sound of steel entering flesh, but was the sound of steel entering a void. A whisper, a sigh, a dry, whistling wind that emanated from the wound like air from a punctured tire. There was no blood. There was no resistance. There was no give, no structure, no bone or muscle or organ. The knife went in and the wound opened, and the wound was a hole, a gap in the thing's body that revealed the same darkness that was beneath its face, the same nothing, the same void. And the thing smiled. It looked down at the knife in its chest, at Nadia's hand on the handle, at the wound that was already closing, the gray skin flowing inward, the void disappearing, the surface restoring itself. And it smiled its wide, symmetrical, mechanical smile, and the needle teeth caught the green light of the clearing, and the clicking continued, steady, patient, unbothered. Already dead, the thing said. Already given, already mine. Nadia pulled the knife free. She stumbled backward, her boots catching in the peat, her body falling, her hands hitting the warm ground. She looked at the knife. The blade was clean. No blood, no residue, no evidence that it had entered anything except air. The steel was cold, colder than it should have been, cold enough that frost was forming on the edge, the moisture in the air crystallizing on the metal, as if the thing's body was not warm but was an absence of warmth, a cold so deep that it could draw heat from steel through a single point of contact. She understood then, not with her mind, with her body, with the animal part of her brain that had been mapping threats since the first organism developed a nervous system. She understood what the thing was, not a creature, not a monster, not a predator, a doorway, a gate. A threshold between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and the thing had been placed there. Not born, not evolved, but placed, constructed, built by the thing in the hole, the thing beneath the cairn, the thing that was the forest and the soil and the warmth and the hunger, to be its representative on the surface, its voice in the world above, its hands in the realm of the living. The thing was not alive. It was not dead. It was the membrane between the two, the wall that separated the living from the dead, and the wall was permeable, and the wall was the door, and the door was in her mind, and the door was open, and the thing was coming through. She could not kill it. She could not stab it. She could not burn its face or cut its chest or damage its body, because its body was not a body. It was a projection, an appendage, a finger of the thing in the hole reaching up through the earth and the peat and the tree rings and the death tree and into the clearing, the way a root reaches up through the soil to drink. But the death tree was the anchor, the death tree was the root, and if she could not kill the finger, she could kill the hand, she could burn the root. She could sever the connection between the thing in the hole and the thing in the clearing by destroying the medium through which the connection flowed, the tree, the warm soil, the peat that was not peat but was the organic matter of the thing's body, the combustible, ancient, carbon-rich substance that the thing had been growing for centuries, spreading through the earth beneath the forest, building its body beneath the ground the way a fungus builds its mycelium. The death tree was the heart, the death tree was the anchor. The death tree was the one thing that connected the thing in the hole to the thing in the clearing, and if she burned the death tree, the connection would be severed, and the thing in the clearing would be cut off from its source, and the door in her mind would close, and the voice would stop, and the heartbeat would stop, and the sensory bleed would stop, and the world would be the world again, the ordinary, mundane, beautiful world of trees and soil and sky, and the sound of her own heart, which was the only sound she wanted to hear. That was the plan. That was the only plan. And it had to be now because the sun was setting and the light in the clearing was fading, and the thing was standing at the base of the death tree between her and the tree, and the clicking was getting louder, and the voice of her father was in her head again, calling her name, calling her back, calling her home to a home that did not exist except in the memory of a daughter who had not cried and could not cry and was now standing in a clearing in the woods of Maine with a hunting knife in her hand and frost on the blade, and the thing smiling at her with its needle teeth, going to cry. Not from grief, from fury. Nadia stood up. She wiped her eyes. She sheathed the knife. She picked up the butane torch and the charcoal starter and the matches and the duct tape, and she began to work. The sun was setting. She had less than 2 hours of daylight. She needed every minute. The pyre took 90 minutes to build. Nadia worked with the focused, mechanical efficiency of a woman who had passed through terror and emerged on the other side into a state that was not calm but was beyond panic, a state of absolute crystalline purpose that was the mind's last defense against dissolution, the state that soldiers call the zone, that surgeons call the flow, that survivors of every catastrophe describe in the same words. I stopped feeling and started doing. She started with the brush. The forest floor was littered with dry, dead material, pine branches that had fallen from the canopy, twigs, bark strips, the resinous debris that accumulated beneath a stand of conifers. She gathered armfuls of it, carrying it to the base of the death tree, piling it against the black bark in a rough ring that encircled the trunk. The brush was dry, bone dry, despite the warm, humid atmosphere of the clearing, and it crackled when she handled it, the sound of dead wood and dead leaves and the desiccated remnants of a forest that was being consumed from the inside out. The resin in the pine branches was thick, sticky, fragrant, the scent of turpentine and vanilla that was the smell of the forest's chemistry, the volatile organic compounds that pines produced as a defense mechanism, as a weapon, as a way of making themselves unpalatable to the things that ate them. Nadia was going to use the forest's own weapon against it. She piled the brush knee-high around the base of the tree, packing it tight, filling the gaps with bark strips and pine needles and the dry, fibrous material that she scraped from the surface of the soil. Then she opened the charcoal starter, 2 cans, a liter each, a thick, oily liquid that smelled of petroleum and lighter fluid, and she poured it. She poured it over the brush, soaking it, drenching it, the liquid running down through the dry material and pooling against the base of the tree, darkening the black bark, soaking into the warm peat. She poured the first can in a circle, moving around the tree, and the second can on top of the first, and when both cans were empty, the ring of brush around the death tree was saturated, heavy with accelerant, the fumes rising in a visible shimmer that distorted the air and made the green twilight of the clearing waver like a mirage. The thing did not move. It was standing 5 meters away at the edge of the clearing, its body motionless, its gray skin visible in the fading light, its mouth still open, the clicking still coming from its throat. It was watching her, not with eyes, with attention, with the focused, patient awareness of something that had been alive for centuries and had seen other humans try to destroy it and had survived every attempt. It did not try to stop her. It did not attack. It did not use the voice. It simply stood there watching, and the patience of its stillness was more terrifying than any attack because the stillness said, "I have seen this before. I have survived this before. You are not the first and you will not be the last, and what you are building is not a weapon but an offering, and I am patient and I am hungry and the night is coming." Nadia ignored it. She worked. She gathered the warm peat, the dark, fibrous, combustible soil that was not soil but was the organic matter of the thing's body, and she piled it on top of the brush, banking it like a furnace, building a layer of fuel that would burn hot and long and deep. That would penetrate the bark of the death tree and reach the wood beneath. That would ignite the resin in the heartwood and send the fire through the trunk and into the roots and down, 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 into the earth, into the thing in the hole, into the body that was the forest. The peat was warm in her hands, not warm like soil, warm like flesh. It was body temperature, 37 degrees, and it had a texture that was not the texture of earth but was the texture of tissue, fibrous, elastic, yielding, the consistency of muscle that had been dried and compressed but was still, at a cellular level, alive. She could feel it pulsing, faintly, slowly, with the same rhythm that she had been hearing in her head for 3 days, the vast, geological heartbeat of the thing in the hole, the pulse of an organism so large that its circulatory system operated on a timescale that made human heartbeats seem like the buzzing of insects. She piled the peat. She packed the brush. She soaked it with the last of the charcoal starter, scraping the cans clean, the oily liquid dripping from the metal and soaking into the fuel. She checked the ring, complete, encircling the trunk knee-high, saturated, packed with peat and brush and bark and pine needles and the resinous, volatile, flammable material that the forest had been producing for centuries, and that she was about to return to it in the form of fire. She checked the matches, long-stemmed wood, the kind that burn for 10 seconds and are designed for lighting fires in wind and rain. She had a full box, 40 matches. She needed one. She checked the butane torch. Full. The flame would burn for 2 hours at maximum output, producing a jet of blue fire that was hot enough to melt copper. She would not need it. The charcoal starter and the dry brush and the peat would be enough to start the fire. But she kept it as a backup, as a last resort, as a weapon that she could hold in her hand and aim at anything that came toward her in the dark. She checked the death tree. The bark was black, the trunk enormous, the canopy a dark roof above her head. She could not see the top, the branches were too dense, the darkness too complete. But she could feel it, the tree's attention, the tree's awareness, the tree's knowledge of what she was doing and what she was about to do. The tree knew. The tree had always known. The tree was the anchor, the heart, the connection, and it was aware that its heart was about to be pierced. And the thing was still watching. The sun went behind the ridge at 16:47. Nadia knew the exact time because she had been checking her watch every 5 minutes, counting down the daylight, measuring the window that she had to work in. The light in the clearing changed, the green twilight deepening to gray, the gray deepening to dark, the dark deepening to the kind of darkness that was not the absence of light but was the presence of the thing that was the forest and the soil and the tree and the hole and the void behind the door in her mind. The thing moved. It was not a sudden movement, nothing about the thing was sudden. It was a gradual, incremental shift, like a shadow lengthening as the sun moves, like a tide rising as the moon pulls. Its body, which had been standing at the edge of the clearing, was now closer, 4 meters from the tree, 3 meters from Nadia. She had not seen it move. She had not heard it move. It had simply been further away and was now closer, and the distance between them was shrinking not because it was walking, but because the space itself was contracting, the clearing getting smaller, the tree getting bigger, the thing getting nearer, the geometry of the site shifting in a way that was not physical but was perceptual, the way a room shifts when you are dreaming, the walls moving closer, the ceiling moving lower, the space tightening around you like a fist. The clicking was louder, not louder in volume, louder in proximity, closer, more intimate, as if the clicking was not coming from the thing's throat but was coming from inside Nadia's skull, from the space behind the door, from the place where the thing had built its nest and was now expanding, pushing the walls of her mind outward, making room, making space, preparing the interior for what was coming. And the voice came back. Nadia, her father. Nadia, sweetheart, what are you doing? What are you doing to my tree? This is my tree, Nadia. I gave this tree to you. I gave you everything. And now you're burning it, after everything I did for you, after everything I gave you. The voice was wrong. Not wrong in the way that a recording is wrong, slightly distorted, slightly off the uncanny valley of reproduced sound. Wrong in a different way. Wrong because it was too right, too perfect, too exact. The voice was not a copy of her father's voice. It was her father's voice, taken from her mind, from the archives of her memory, and it was being used against her with a precision that was not technological but was biological, the thing reaching into her brain and finding the exact neurons that stored the sound of her father's voice and activating them directly, bypassing her ears entirely, making her hear a sound that was not in the air but was in her mind, as real as any sound she had ever heard, more real, because the sounds that come from inside are always more real than the sounds that come from outside. Nadia gritted her teeth. She lit the butane torch. The blue flame hissed, casting a harsh, chemical light across the base of the death tree, the shadows jumping and dancing as the flame wavered in the still air. She aimed the torch at the base of the brush pile, at the point where the charcoal starter had soaked into the dry material, at the place where the accelerant was thickest and the fuel was driest and the fire would catch fastest. "You're not my father," Nadia said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady because the voice was the one thing she could control, the one thing the thing could not take from her, the one weapon that was hers and hers alone. "You're not my father. You're a parasite. You're a thing that lives in a hole and eats people and uses their love against them, and I am going to burn you." The thing smiled. The needle teeth spread, the mouth widened, and the smile was the same, too wide, too symmetrical, too mechanical. But there was something new in it now. Amusement. The thing was amused. It was watching a small, soft, warm-blooded creature threaten it with fire, and it was amused the way a mountain is amused by a wind, the way an ocean is amused by a wave, the way a thing that has been alive for centuries is amused by a thing that has been alive for decades. "Your father is here," the thing said. Not in her father's voice, in its own voice, the clicking modulated into words that were not words but were patterns that her brain interpreted as words. "He came to me. He came to the tree. He was old and afraid and he did not want to die, and I showed him the door and he walked through it. He is here. He is part of me. And when you burn the tree, you will burn him too." Nadia's hand faltered. The torch wavered, the blue flame licking at the edge of the brush pile but not igniting it. Not yet, the heat close but not close enough. The words had found their mark, not the rational, scientific, skeptical part of her mind, which knew that the thing was lying, that it was a manipulator, that it would say anything to prevent her from completing the burning, but the other part. The daughter part, the part that had not cried, the part that was still holding her father's hand in a hospital room in Providence, Rhode Island, listening to his last heartbeat, noting it, filing it away, and never letting it go. "You're lying," she said, but her voice was not as steady as it had been, and the thing heard the wavering, and the smile widened. "I never lie," the thing said. "I don't need to. The dead don't lie, Nadia. The dead have no reason to lie. Your father is here. He has been here since the day he died. He came to me because I was the only door that was open, the only path that was available, the only way to stay close to the world, to stay close to you. He gave me his soul so that he could stay near you, and you are going to burn him." The torch was shaking in Nadia's hand. The blue flame danced. The brush pile was right there, soaked with accelerant, packed with fuel, ready to burn. One touch of the flame and it would go up, a conflagration that would engulf the death tree in seconds, that would send the fire through the trunk and into the roots and into the earth and into the thing in the hole. But the thing was saying that her father was in the tree, that his soul was in the tree, that burning the tree would burn him, would destroy whatever remnant of him still existed, whatever fragment of his consciousness the thing had preserved and was using and was holding hostage against the threat of fire. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. The thing was a manipulator. The thing was a parasite. The thing had been using her father's voice for 3 days to try to pull her through the door, and now that she was threatening the tree, now that she was threatening the one thing that connected the thing to the world above, it was using the final weapon, the ultimate leverage, the one thing that could make a daughter hesitate, that could make a daughter lower the torch and step back and let the thing live. Her father's love. The thing was using her father's love for her as a shield. And it was working. Nadia stood in the clearing, the torch in her hand, the flame burning, the brush pile soaked, the death tree waiting, the thing smiling, and she could not move. She could not act. The door in her mind was wide open, and through it poured the voice and the heartbeat and the sensory bleed and the love of a father for a daughter, the love that the thing had stolen and was now wearing like a mask, like a face, like a smile. The sun was gone. The clearing was dark. The thing was closer, 2 meters now, close enough to touch, close enough that she could smell it, the copper androt scent that was the smell of its body, the smell of the hole, the smell of the void. Its hands were at its sides. Its needle teeth were visible. Its mouth was opening, wider, the rows of teeth separating, the throat visible, the dark, spiraling, cartilaginous throat that was not a throat but was a tunnel, a passage, a corridor leading down, down, down into the earth, into the hole, into the thing in the hole, into the body that was the forest. And through the door in her mind, through the opening that was now so wide that she could see through it, could see the world on the other side, the world that was a body, a digestion, a hunger, she saw her father. Not a memory, not a hallucination, a presence, a figure standing in the dark on the other side of the door, his back to her, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He was there. He was real. He was in the tree, in the thing, in the forest, in the hole, and he was not a ghost. He was a prisoner, a captive, a soul that had been taken and held and used, and the thing was showing him to her now, showing her the truth, because the truth was the last weapon, the one that would make her stop. "Dad," Nadia whispered. The figure did not turn around. It stood there in the dark, its shoulders slumped, its head bowed, and Nadia felt the pull, the gravitational, irresistible biological pull of a daughter toward a parent, the oldest force, the first bond, the connection that was formed in the womb and reinforced by every touch and every word and every heartbeat that she had ever heard, and that she was hearing now, coming from the figure in the dark, the heartbeat that she had noted and filed away and never cried about. She took a step toward the door, toward the thing, toward the tree, toward the figure in the dark. The thing's smile widened. The needle teeth gleamed. The mouth opened wider. The throat was a tunnel, and the tunnel led to the hole, and the hole led to the thing in the hole, and the thing in the hole was hungry, and Nadia was one step away from walking into its mouth. She stopped. She stopped because she saw something, a detail, a small, specific, forensic detail that the thing had not intended her to see, a detail that was wrong, that did not fit, that was inconsistent with the image it was projecting. Her father's hands, the figure in the dark, the figure that was supposed to be her father, had its hands at its sides, and the hands were wrong. They were not her father's hands. Her father had been a mechanic, a man who worked with his hands, whose hands were scarred and calloused and stained with grease, whose left index finger was crooked from a break that had not healed properly. The figure's hands were smooth, unscarred, uncalloused, the hands of something that had never worked, never grasped, never held anything except the thing that it was reaching for. The hands were the thing's hands, gray, long-fingered, the nails dark and curved. The figure was not her father. It was the thing. The thing was wearing her father the way it was wearing the forest, as a costume, as a lure, as a way of saying, "I am what you love," when it was not what she loved. It was what ate what she loved. Nadia felt the fury return. Not the cold, crystalline fury of the pyre building, but a hot, molten, volcanic fury that rose from the base of her spine and flooded her body with heat. The heat of a living thing, a warm thing, a thing that had a heartbeat and a body and a mind and a soul, and was not going to give any of them to the thing in the hole. She turned the torch on the brush pile. She pressed the flame to the charcoal-soaked material, and the fire caught. It caught with a whoosh, a sudden, violent intake of air, and a rush of flame that sucked the oxygen from the clearing and sent a wall of heat upward along the trunk of the death tree. The brush exploded, not burned, exploded, the accelerant and the resin and the dry, combustible material igniting simultaneously, the fire racing around the ring that Nadia had built, the flames reaching for the black bark, the heat so intense that the air above the tree shimmered and the pine needles on the lowest branches curled and blackened and caught. The thing screamed, not the clicking, not the patient, rhythmic biological percussion that had been the background of Nadia's terror for 3 days. A scream, a real, genuine, uncontrolled scream of pain and shock and rage, a sound that was not modulated, not calculated, not designed to manipulate or communicate, but was the raw, unfiltered sound of a living thing, a thing that was alive in its way, in its dark, ancient, subterranean way, that was being hurt. The fire spread, not along the ground through the tree. The resin in the heartwood, the volatile, flammable, ancient organic compounds that had been building in the trunk for centuries, ignited, and the fire traveled through the wood the way electricity travels through a wire, fast, directed, following the path of least resistance, the path that the thing had built through the tree, the connection between the surface and the hole, the route that connected the thing in the clearing to the thing in the ground. And the fire reached the thing. Not through the air, through the connection. The thing was linked to the tree was linked to the hole, and the fire was in the tree, and the fire followed the link the way fire follows a fuse, the way fire follows a trail of gunpowder, the way fire follows any path that has been prepared for it by the careless accumulation of combustible material. The thing's body ignited, not from the outside, from the inside. The gray skin glowed, then reddened, then brightened, the light coming from within, from the core of the thing's body, the void that was not a void but was the channel, the passage, the corridor that connected the thing to the thing in the hole. The fire was traveling through that corridor, and the thing was the corridor, and the thing was burning from the inside out. The scream changed. It became a sound that Nadia had never heard, a sound that was not human and not animal and not mechanical, but was all three, a sound that was the shriek of burning organic matter and the grinding of stone and the wet, tearing, ripping sound of something that was being pulled apart by a force that was acting on every part of it simultaneously, a force that was not external but was internal, a force that was the fire consuming the thing's body from the inside, traveling through the connection, through the root, through the link, reaching the thing in the hole. The thing in the hole screamed too. Nadia heard it, not with her ears but through the door in her mind, through the connection that was now a conduit for fire as well as sound. The thing in the hole was burning. The vast, ancient, subterranean organism that was the forest and the soil and the warmth and the hunger was burning, and the fire was spreading through its body the way the fire had spread through the tree, fast, directed, following the paths that the thing had built. The mycelium-like network of organic matter that threaded through the earth beneath the clearing, and the fire was consuming it, and the thing was dying, and the scream was the scream of something that had been alive for centuries and was now, finally, in the fire, in the heat, in the light that it could not see and could not escape, dying. The death tree was a pillar of fire. The flames were 100 feet high, the heat so intense that the air in the clearing was shimmering. The pine trees at the edge of the clearing were wilting, their needles curling, their bark splitting. The concentric rings of pine, the walls of the fortress, the rings of the target, the architecture of the thing's body, were catching, one ring after another, the fire jumping from tree to tree, the resin in the bark igniting, the canopy going up in a wave of light and heat that turned the dark clearing into a hellish, blazing, daylight-bright inferno. The thing was on the ground. Its body was a shape of fire, a humanoid silhouette of flame that was shrinking, contracting, the gray skin peeling away in burning strips, the void beneath the skin filling with fire, the needle teeth falling out one by one, each tooth a tiny spark that arced through the air and died. The clicking had stopped. The voice had stopped. The heartbeat had stopped. The thing was silent, and the silence was not the silence of the forest but the silence of a fire, the roar of the flames replacing every sound that the thing had been making, the heat replacing every sensation that the thing had been producing. Nadia stood in the clearing, her back to the fire, her face to the darkness, and she watched the thing burn. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel relief. She felt the fire, felt it in her body, felt it in the connection, felt it in the door in her mind, which was not closing but was burning, the edges of the door curling and blackening and crumbling, the opening narrowing, the world on the other side, the world that was a body, a digestion, a hunger, collapsing, folding in on itself, being consumed by the fire that was traveling through the connection and burning everything on both sides. The thing was ash. A pile of gray, fine, weightless ash that was indistinguishable from the ash that was falling from the burning trees, the ash that was raining down on the clearing like snow, covering the warm peat, covering the open cairn, covering the hole that was no longer a hole but was a pit of fire, the flames reaching down into the earth, following the thing's body into the ground, consuming the root, the link, the connection, burning it all. The death tree fell. It did not fall like a tree, slowly groaning, its trunk tilting and its branches catching on its neighbors. It collapsed. The fire had eaten the heartwood, had consumed the trunk from the inside, had turned the core of the tree into a chimney of flame, and the structure that remained, the bark, the outer rings, the branches, had nothing to hold it up, and it fell inward into itself, into the fire, a collapse that was less a fall and more an implosion, the tree folding into its own burning center. The ground shook. Not an earthquake, a release, a settling. The thing in the hole was dying, and its body, the earth, the soil, the peat, the organic matter that it had been building for centuries, was collapsing, the voids and tunnels and passages that it had created filling in, the ground subsiding, the clearing sinking, the concentric rings of pine trees tilting inward as the earth beneath them gave way. Nadia ran. She ran for the track, for the gate, for the car, for the road. She ran through the burning forest, the flames on either side of her, the heat on her back, the ash in her hair, the smoke in her lungs. She ran, and she did not stop, and she did not look back, and she did not hear the voice or the heartbeat or the clicking, because they were gone, burned, consumed, destroyed. And the door in her mind was closing, the edges blackened and crumbling, the opening narrowing, the world on the other side receding, fading, going dark. She reached the car. She got in. She drove. The road was behind her, and the fire was behind her, and the night was ahead, and the night was just night, ordinary, dark, cold, the night of a world that did not have a thing in it that lived in a hole and ate people's souls and used their love as a weapon. She drove south. She drove until the fire was a glow on the horizon, then a memory, then nothing. She drove until the forest was behind her, and the road was ordinary, and the world was the world, and she was alone in the car with the engine and the headlights, and the sound of her own breathing and her own heartbeat, which was the only sound in her head, the only sound she wanted to hear, the only sound that was left. The apartment in Boston was small and cold and quiet, and Nadia stood in the bathroom in front of the mirror and looked at her face and listened. She could hear her heartbeat in her own chest, in her own body, the steady, regular, 72 beats per minute rhythm of a healthy, living, 37-year-old human heart. She could hear it in her ears, in her throat, in the pulse at her wrists. She could hear it the way she had always heard it, faintly, subconsciously, the background noise of a living body. And she could hear something else. Not the forest, not the thing, not the voice of her father or the clicking of the Skudakumooch or the geological heartbeat of the thing in the hole. Those sounds were gone. The fire had consumed them. The death tree was ash. The thing was ash. The hole was filled with the collapsed remains of the thing's body. And the forest, the real forest, the natural forest, the forest of trees and soil and birds and insects that had been there before the thing and would be there after, was growing back. The pine trees reclaiming the clearing, the soil cooling, the warmth draining away, the ground returning to the temperature that the ground in Maine in October was supposed to be. But the door was still open, not wide, not the gaping, uncontrolled opening that had been widening for 3 days, that had been letting the thing in, that had been pouring the world of the thing into the world of Nadia. The door was narrow, a crack, a sliver of light, or rather, a sliver of dark, a thin line of the thing's world that was still visible in the edge of her perception, like a frame around a picture, like a border around a window. She could hear the forest, not the Blackwood forest, any forest, every forest. She could hear the heartbeat of every living thing within a mile of her apartment, the sparrows on the roof, the mice in the walls, the rats in the alley, the dogs in the apartments above and below, the pigeons on the windowsill, the cockroaches in the kitchen. She could hear them all simultaneously, a layered, complex, overwhelming symphony of biological percussion that was playing in her head at every moment, awake and asleep, eyes open and eyes closed, in the silence and in the noise. The sensory bleed had not stopped. It had diminished, reduced from the deafening, mind-obliterating roar that she had experienced in the clearing to a manageable, ambient hum that she could, with effort, push to the edges of her awareness. But it was there. It was always there. And it would always be there because the door was still open, and the door could not be closed, because the door was not in the tree or in the hole or in the thing. The door was in her. The thing had opened it and the fire had burned the thing, but the door was in her mind, and her mind was not a tree, and it could not be burned. The thing had not wanted to eat her body. She understood that now, standing in front of the mirror looking at her own face, which was thin and pale, and had the expression of someone who had been to a place and come back and could not unsee what she had seen. The thing had wanted to eat her soul, her consciousness, her awareness, the part of her that was not meat and was not bone, and was not the physical structure of her body, but was the thing that made her Nadia and not someone else. It had wanted to consume herself and replace it with itself, to take the space that her mind occupied and fill it with its mind, to wear her the way it wore the forest, the way it wore the gray-skinned figure in the clearing, the way it wore the voice of her father. It had not succeeded. The fire had stopped it, but it had left the door open. And through the door, the forest was still audible. Not the thing's forest, not the body forest, not the digestion forest, but the real forest, the living forest, the forest of heartbeats and breath, and the vast, layered, beautiful, terrifying symphony of life that was playing in every forest on earth, in every field, in every park, in every garden, in every patch of grass and cluster of trees and stand of weeds that existed anywhere within the range of her perception. Nadia could hear the world breathing. She could hear it now in her apartment in the city, in the concrete and glass and steel of Boston, Massachusetts. She could hear the trees in the park 3 blocks away, their slow, sap-pressure heartbeats. She could hear the birds on the power lines, their rapid, fluttering pulses. She could hear the insects in the grass, their barely perceptible, impossibly fast vibrations. She could hear the mice in the walls and the rats in the alleys and the cats in the windows and the dogs in the yards and the humans, millions of them, millions of heartbeats, millions of circulatory systems all pumping, all beating, all alive, all pouring into her mind through the door that would not close. And beneath all of it, beneath the heartbeats, beneath the breath, beneath the biological symphony, she could hear something else. Something that was not the thing and was not the forest and was not the living. Something that was the space between the heartbeats, the silence between the notes. The gap between one pulse and the next, the fraction of a second when the heart is between contractions, the moment of stillness between the systole and the diastole, the instant when the blood is not moving and the body is not pumping and the world holds its breath. In that silence, in that gap, in that fraction of a second between one heartbeat and the next, Nadia could hear the thing, not the Skudakumooch, not the thing in the hole, not the gray-skinned figure or the needle teeth or the clicking or the voice. The thing itself, the consciousness, the awareness, the hunger that had been alive for centuries and had been burned and had been destroyed and was dead. And it was not dead. It was in the silence. It was in the gap. It was in the space between the heartbeats, the space that existed in every living thing, the space that was not life and was not death but was the boundary between them, the membrane, the wall, the door. The thing had not died in the fire. The thing had moved. It had left the tree and the hole and the forest and the clearing, and it had moved into the only space that was available to it, the space between the heartbeats, the silence between the notes, the gap that existed in every living thing on earth. It had not been destroyed. It had been distributed. It had been spread like a seed, like a spore, like a virus, into the fabric of the world itself, into the biological rhythm of every living thing, into the silence that existed between every heartbeat of every organism on the planet. And Nadia could hear it. She could hear it in the silence between her own heartbeats. She could hear it in the silence between the sparrow's heartbeats and the dog's heartbeats and the mice's heartbeats and the tree's heartbeats. She could hear it everywhere, in everything, in the gap between one moment and the next, in the space between one sound and the next, in the silence that was not silence but was the thing, waiting, listening, breathing. The thing was not in the forest anymore. The thing was in the world. The thing was in the silence, and the silence was everywhere. Nadia looked at her reflection in the mirror. She looked at her face, thin, pale, exhausted, the face of a woman who had fought a monster and won and lost. She looked at her eyes, which were the same eyes they had always been, brown, tired, human. She looked at her mouth, which was closed, which was not clicking, which was not smiling the mechanical smile of something that had learned what a smile was by watching humans do it. And she listened. She listened to the heartbeat. Her own heartbeat in her own chest, the steady, regular, 72 beats per minute rhythm of a healthy, living, 37-year-old human heart. And between the beats, in the silence, in the gap, in the space where the heart was still and the blood was not moving and the body was, for a fraction of a second, not alive. She heard it click. Once softly, patiently. The door was open. The door would always be open. And on the other side of the door, in the silence between the heartbeats of every living thing on earth, something was waiting, something was listening, something was breathing, something was hungry. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, so you don't miss the stories yet to come.